and members of our committee and whoever's listening. I'm State Senator Mimi Stewart from the International District and the East Gateway area of Albuquerque, District 17. I'm glad to be here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And I do have a very sparse group of representatives in the House that I'd like to have them introduce themselves.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I'm Representative Joy Garrett from the beautiful West Side, Northwest Albuquerque. Happy to be here.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. I miss our meetings, and I miss being here in person. So I'd like to thank all of you for all your hard work. I'm Susan Herrera, representative from the 41st District of Northern New Mexico, including the counties of Rio Ribas, Santa Fe, and Taos.
Thank you. And I have a list of the folks that are online. So I'll start with Senator Gonzalez.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good morning, Senator Roberto Bobby J. Gonzalez, District 6, which is part of Santa Fe, Los Alamos, Rio Riba, and Taos. And good morning to everyone again, and let's have a good meeting.
Thank you. Representative Lara.
Good morning. My name is Ray Lara. I'm the State Representative of House District 34, Southern Doña Ana County, bordering Texas and the Republic of Mexico.
Thank you. Thank you. Representative, you know what I didn't do, and I apologize. Representative Alonso Baldonado, my apologies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. State Representative Alonso Baldonado. I'm from Los Lunas, represent about half of Valencia County. Thank you for having us today.
Thank you. And Senator Pinto, would you introduce yourself, please?
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Senator Shannon Pinto. I represent District 3, McKinley, and San Juan County. Thank you. Good morning.
Representative Dow.
Good morning, Chairwoman, Representative Rebecca Dow. I'm from Southern New Mexico. I have Grant, Hidalgo, and Sierra County. Thank you.
Thank you. Rebecca, Representative Dow, are you on the phone?
I am on a laptop until 10. I'm in and out today for other meetings, and I'll be in person Thursday and Friday.
Oh, okay. It sounds echoey.
Oh, okay. I don't know.
Representative Sarinana.
Good morning, Madam Chair. I am Debbie Sariñana. I represent House District 21 in the eastern part of Albuquerque, which is East Central Corridor and International District. I'm happy to be here, and thank you everyone who's presenting today. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Figueroa.
Good morning, Madam Chair. I am Natalie Figueroa. I represent House District 30 in the Northeast Heights of Albuquerque, and I am very glad to be here this morning.
Thank you. Representative Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had hoped to be there in person, but I have a little person that I'm taking care of, so I'm going to excuse all of my craziness and disappearing for a moment because she's 16 months and on the go. I'm Representative Liz Thompson, House District 24, Northeast Heights of Albuquerque. And unfortunately, I have another committee tomorrow and Friday, so that may be hit and miss. But hello, everyone, and I look forward to a good meeting.
Thank you. Representative Johnson.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good morning, Madam Chair and colleagues and staff. I'm Representative Wanda Johnson, and I'm calling in from Gallup, my home district, McKinley and San Juan counties, and I have the privilege and pleasure of representing Northwest New Mexico. So good morning, everyone.
Thank you. Senator Padilla.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Madam Vice Chair and the rest of the committee. Good morning, everybody. Senator Michael Padilla. I represent the southwest quadrant of Bernalillo County, about 85% of it. I really appreciate the agenda you put together this time, Madam Chair, and I appreciate you having me here. Thank you.
Thank you. And Representative Roy Caballero.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee, and the public. My name is Patricia Roybal Caballero, and I represent House District 13, which is the far southwest quadrant of Albuquerque. And I'm happy to be here again in our committee. And I also will be probably in and out today, and because we're overlapping with Health and Human Services in the next 2 days as well. But I will be in the meeting as much as possible today and look forward to the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Andres Romero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Andres Romero, and I represent House District 10, which is the far South Valley in Bernalillo County and parts southeast Albuquerque. I was just conducting my third period class, so I'm sorry to be a little tardy, Madam Chair, but I'm pulling double duty today in the classroom. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate everyone that's here because it's always an effort in these trying times, but we'll do it. Life is too short not to. The first item, we're not going to do, I'm sorry, Rachel, I apologize.
Not yet.
Not the staff?
Oh, so Madam Chair, we've got almost everybody here. Emily Huxley, Chelsea Canada, Jessica Hathaway, who is, were you here last meeting? Jessica's new, wasn't here last meeting. She's taken on the CTE and charter school block. Kim Dedeaux, who am I missing? Joey Simon, and then Marissa Branch, who is running all of the IT equipment, the WebEx stuff, and then of course Vanessa Hucker and I.
Okay, thank you. And you know what, I just glanced over my shoulder because I don't have a screen in front of me, and I just noticed Representative David Gallegos. Representative Gallegos, would you introduce yourself? I think that's you. Oh, never mind. Adan Delgado. Never mind. I thought I saw him. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and go on to the second item on the agenda. We still don't have enough voting members for approval, but let's go ahead and go to item number 2. And we have Adan Delgado, Dennis Roche, Scott Alder, Karen Trujillo, Sue Cleveland, Brenda Vigil, and Cody Sumter, who will be doing the presentations. And it's all about school budgets and solvencies. And before they speak, Representative Fajardo, would you introduce yourself? We need your mic on.
I don't understand all the rules that happen now with everything going on. State Representative Kelly Fajardo from Valencia County. Sorry for being a little tardy. I was upstairs finishing up a phone call, and glad to be here today in Santa Fe.
Thank you. And now for those folks, Superintendent Roche, Adan, you can go ahead and get started.
Morning.
Okay.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, good morning. It's great to be with you today, and I'm navigating a new meeting software, so I'm hoping this goes smoothly. I'm going to attempt to share my screen now. Okay, looks like we're on and ready to go. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, thank you. So good morning, everyone. Today we'll be talking a little bit about the FY 2021 public school operating budget process, and just talk a little bit about the last essentially 4 or 5 months we've gone through in getting to the place that we are now, and describe some of the things that happened and some of the changes that have been made in the operating budget process.
Okay.
So the first thing I want to do is just give you a little bit of an overview of what we'll talk about. We'll talk about changes to the operating budget process outcomes, and some other related items: unit value, K5 Plus and ELTP, Senate Bill 96, cash balances, and CARES budgeted categories. So before we get started, there's a group of people I want to recognize. Our school budget and finance analysis staff has probably gone through the most challenging school budget operating season in its history. This operating budget season was, it included the effects of the pandemic, stay-at-home work orders in a department in a bureau that is really built around a lot of manual processes. That was a huge challenge. We went through hiring freezes, we went through budget constraints in mid-year reductions in our agency budget, and along with all of the new aspects of the operating budget process that were pushed out, this group of people really just stepped up and did an amazing job to get to the finish line as far as getting the budgets finalized by the July 1 deadline. And just so everyone knows, there's a statutory requirement that budgets get approved on July 1. So there is no option for delay or having more time to get these things finished. They had to get them done. I want to recognize David Craig, the director, Rainer Martins, the deputy director, Sarah Cordova, and Vince Vigil, the supervisors, and the analysts, Susan Benavides, Lucas Lori Ross, Karen Keith, Elizabeth Romero, Anthony Duran, Leon Moncayo, and our BizOps in there, Maurice Rivera Sanchez. These people really just stepped up and delivered. I also want to recognize all of the hardworking business officials and folks out in the school districts and in the charter schools that also went through many challenges with this operating budget season, including all of the things that they were doing at the same time and in parallel. Dealing with CARES Act funding and preparations for the very, very different school year that they're facing this year, dealing with PPE orders, dealing with sanitization of the schools, all of the things that are associated with these unprecedented times that we're working through with the pandemic. I just really appreciate all the work that people have put into to continue the work of funding our schools and making sure that the resources that are necessary are pushed out. So just thanks to all those people. All right, so here's a bit of an overview of the main events that happened starting last January. And I'll start with the FY 20. Actually, it was the 19 legislative session where some new statutory requirements were put in place, including an education plan that was outlined in House Bill 5, Senate Bill 1. So the FY 21 was the first year that education plan was actually implemented. So this year was the year that we rolled that out. So in January and February, we started messaging to school districts what the new operating budget submission would look like, including the education plan and including new program codes that would be implementing. In March is when we started getting the pandemic health orders and started to have to shift to a new mode of operation, and school districts started to learn of some of the challenges that they were going to face in associated with the pandemic. We held our first ever virtual spring budget conference in April, And at that conference, we gave a notification of the preliminary unit value. The unit value is the base number that all school budgets are based on, as far as their SEG payments. So at the time of the spring budget conference, we knew that there were some pretty major shifts coming as far as the revenues for the state. But we still had statute from the regular FY20 legislative session in place, and did not have latitude to make significant adjustments to what was included during the regular session, even though we anticipated there were going to be significant changes to appropriations. We didn't know where the appropriations would be adjusted. So, we communicated very clearly to LEAs during our spring budget conference that we were going to base our operating budget season on the FY20, the 2020 regular legislative session outcomes, but we also cautioned them to be very cautious about anything that they budgeted that was new spending, to be very, very careful with that, and included even, direction about making sure that their contracts included language about being able to make adjustments if appropriations for specific spending was adjusted. And that was a pretty continuous message we used throughout the operating budget season. So in June, we had the special legislative session with the solvency reductions that took place. In July, we had initial SEG payments based on regular session appropriations, because there wasn't time to make adjustments to those payments from the time of the the special legislative session to the time that those initial July payments went out. So we essentially started July as if the solvency reductions hadn't happened, because of the timing of the special session and because of the fact that districts need their payments to be pushed out at the beginning of July so that they can start making payroll in those early weeks of July. So the special session required that we adjust the unit values. There was an announcement made at the end of August. No, I'm sorry. The new preliminary unit value was set by August 1st. So the announcement was made about that. August SCG payments were reduced based on the solvency reductions. And currently in September, we're still working through bar notifications, budget adjustment request notification. That has been sent out to the districts, and the districts and charter schools are working on those budget adjustments. And they're based on solvency, the general reduction in appropriations for the SEG funding, but also on changes to the elementary PE funding that was eliminated, extended learning time program and K5 plus programs. Both of those programs were affected by the special session, and just by the environment that schools are working in, the challenge of making those programs happen, shifted based on the pandemic and based on some of the changes that took place during the special session. So we're working with districts to try and get to a solid landing spot on those programs. And ideally we would have had those pushed out earlier, but the programs that manage those programs are still working with the school districts and the charter schools on finalizing their participation in those two programs. You'll probably hear from some of the districts later that are speaking today about all the challenges that they faced in putting their operating budgets together. One business official I spoke with recently described it as being like trying to build a house on shifting sand, that they've really struggled with the changes that they've been dealing with. And I appreciate the difficulty that they're going through and trying to land in a really solid spot for this budget cycle. that's an overview of kind of the timeline that we're working on with, and we're going to go through some details on the operating budget season. So there's clearly a greater expectation around transparency and oversight when it comes to school funding in the state, and many of you know that the factors that are affecting that. There's major litigation going on, and just a heightened expectation that we are being responsible overseers of the funding that is going out to fund public schools, and that funding is getting to the students that it's intended to get to. So that has brought on some of these changes that we're working through, and the biggest shift that we're dealing with is a changing expectation for how state equalization guarantee funding is used. The design of SEG and the traditional approach to SEG is that the SEG, the state equalization guarantee, is a formula that is used to calculate how state appropriated funding to schools is appropriated out to individual schools and school districts. And the history has been that there has been, a lot of latitude on how districts and charter schools use that money once it gets into the SEG. I think the current landscape is putting us in a place where we're shifting that, and we're getting more into the direction of how some of those funds are used, especially funds that are specifically generated by certain demographics within the student population. At risk is one of the clearest examples of that, where the SEG has a formula that calculates how much each school gets for at-risk students, and it's part of the SEG, but we're asking for more detail in asking school districts how they're spending that at-risk funding. So the major changes that came about for the operating budget review process, the biggest one was the education plan that was required for the first time this year. The new Universal Chart of Accounts program codes that were added was another major shift. And we had some growing pains associated with the introduction of those new UCOA program codes, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And additional oversight steps related to expenditure benchmarks, most notably dollars in the classroom calculations. So the required elements of the educational plan: instructional time, instructional days, hours, and frequency of release days, services to improve opportunities for at-risk students with the associated budget spreadsheet, extended learning time programs and K5+ programs, beginning teacher mentorship, class size, teaching load, programs to ensure the implementation of Bilingual Multicultural Act, Indian Education Act, and the Hispanic Education Act, program costs generated and budgeted expenditures for students with disabilities and ancillary programs, FAPE for students with disabilities, and FAPE is free and appropriate public education, common performance targets. A little bit about the format and initial review process. So for the first time ever, we put out an SEG breakdown developed for each school district based on projected SEG components. This was a completely new thing that we did this year. So typically, school districts get what we call a 910B5 worksheet that gives a breakdown of the units that are generated, that then get multiplied by the unit value to determine what the overall budget for the district is as far as their SEG funding. This year we took it a step further, and we extracted some of the projected amounts, and this was it's an imprecise calculation because of the way the SEG works and how it evolves throughout the year. At the beginning of the year, pretty much what we can do is we can project estimates of what will get generated in the SEG based on items that were considered during the appropriation process, but do not directly generate units in the SEG. So there were things that were considered during the legislative process and coming up with the appropriation, but don't translate directly to units. The units are a little bit easier to calculate because they're based on a set number. But what we did for the other items is we took the amount that was considered during the legislative process in coming up with the SEG appropriation, and we calculated the percentage of total statewide SEG at each school district or charter school received during the last fiscal year. And then we multiplied the amount considered during the appropriation process times that percentage, just to get a breakdown of how much, generally how much money should be targeted during the educational plan development. So this is a new step that I feel would give districts, a little more insight as to how much of their SEG is associated with some of these other elements that aren't broken out in terms of units in their SEG payments. An example of this is instructional materials. So there was a pretty significant investment in instructional materials that got included in the SEG appropriation, and that funding, loses its identity generally when it goes into the SEG. And we backed out an estimate of how much the SEG included for instructional materials, just to give you an example of one of the things that was included in that list. So once those went out to school districts, a format was developed by divisions and bureaus across the department, and we had probably 11 or 12 bureaus in the department involved in the education plan review. So the review process results, some information about that. So PED program staff reviewed to ensure student opportunities were the focus of the plan. More than a third of the plans were approved at the initial submission. A significant success of the process was the development and implementation of NM Dash, as well as the templates currently in place. So I want to give some kudos to Mayra Valtierrez. She kind of spearheaded this process of implementing she's an NMPED employee. She spearheaded the process of developing out this NM Dash system, which is a system that the schools had already been using for educational plans in the state. But they built out a new interface that allowed for submission of documents and submissions and evidence related to the education plan. So it's a nice system. Generally we had good feedback on the interface process in gathering information for the educational plan through that online system. So also for FY20 and 21, no funds have been withheld from districts or charter schools to date. We're really taking this as a learning year and getting this rolled out, and working with school districts to try and get to the place where we have 100% approved plans. We still have about 4 districts that we're working with to try and get finalized, but that team has done just a tremendous amount of work in getting through the educational plan review process. So out of the School Budget Bureau, we had a change in the Universal Chart of Accounts, which is the system that is used to categorize revenue and expenditures within the school budgeting process. So for the first time ever, PED used new program codes within the UCOA for operating budget submittal to clarify and identify operational fund expenditures. The use of the new program codes allows for greater oversight of how SEG appropriation considerations reflect district and charter school expenditure priorities and inform educational plan approvals while working to minimize redundant data submissions. Challenges related to the implementation of program codes arose during LEA focus group sessions. And as a result of some of that feedback that we got during the focus sessions, we added a spreadsheet to the educational plan process, specifically around at risk, because we knew that there were going to be some growing pains and some things that we just weren't going to be able to figure out until we had gone through the process and had people kind of chew on working through the use of the program codes. And in reviewing the program code submissions, we see that there are, a handful of school districts and a few more charter schools that are still struggling with the use of the program codes, and we're going to continue to work with them on getting the program codes adjusted. But especially for at-risk, the submission of the spreadsheets along with the educational plan give a lot of insight into the uses of the funds that are being planned. Here's a listing of the new program codes. 4025 was a special code that we developed to tag funding for at-risk students, but also students who are at risk, but are also special education students. We wanted to make sure to be able to capture those expenditures explicitly. 4030 is for K5 Plus program, and 4040 is for the extended learning time program. And we also adjusted the definitions for program code 420, which was already in there for at-risk programs. And we included the language from HB5 that spoke specifically to the categories of programs that would be appropriately be funded using the at-risk funding. And this is the language right out of HB5 that includes research or evidence-based social or academic interventions such as, and there's a listing there. This is just a quick snapshot of the kind of breakdown we get from in looking at the operational sub-fund and broken up by program code. So this is the kind of information that we can now create using those program codes. The no program portion of this pie chart that you're seeing it's kind of a general use program code where you just don't specify the exactly which program the funds are supporting. That one thing we've found is that many districts are historically used to not attributing benefit costs to some of the special programs or to funding sources that are targeted for specific purposes, and benefits ended up from a lot of districts ending up in that no program category. So we're learning a lot from this first year of implementation. So the next category of things we looked at was average salary increase verification. So during the normal process, we have a couple of worksheets that are submitted. So for the regular operating budget process, we rolled out the 4% requirement and then adjusted after the special session for the 1% increase for certain school personnel. And LEAs will be submitting those by September 30th. Let's see, a separate calendar for school sites this year. This is new as a result of HB5 SB1. School level instructional time information was required as part of the educational plan. So districts and charter schools were required to separate calendars to provide instructional time calculations for each of the schools operating on the calendar different than the district calendar year. Each budget entity calendar was then approved at both the district and school levels. Pupil-teacher ratio, we gathered some information around this. Entities specify to both paying minimum teacher administrator salaries and soliciting parental input in the operating budget development. For FY 2021, the certification form was amended to include information on existing pupil-teacher ratios, staff class loads, and the status of any waivers for those provisions. This change provides baseline data to inform decision-making around educational plan and operating budget approvals. Okay, so beginning classroom spending oversight. This is another portion of what was worked on. Beginning with the FY20 operating budget approval process, PED expanded the rigor of classroom spending oversight. Special attention was paid to both agency performance metrics for dollars in the classroom and the entities identified in the standard deviation analysis provided for in the General Appropriations Act. So there's some special language around how we are to evaluate classroom in the dollars in the classroom spending based on a standard deviation calculation. We'll talk a little bit more about that. By the way, any of these slides that have a scroll up at the upper right-hand corner, there is an associated handout that you can look at that has some data that's connected to some of these slides. PED staff work collaboratively with school districts, school district and charter leaders to increase spending in specific areas of school budgets related to classroom spending. The improved operating budget process, here are some positive outcomes that we can point to: achieving agency benchmarks for dollars in the classroom spending, identifying entities through a standard deviation calculation that require additional scrutiny around classroom spending, and allowing for better program review and appropriation comparisons. So here's some more information about dollars in the classroom. Since 2008, certain function codes in the UCOA are used for classroom spending in the operational fund. This includes the 1000 function for instruction, the 2100 for support services for students, and 2200 for support services for instruction. Provisions of the GAA General Appropriations Act of 2020 provide for performance metrics for spending in these three functions as a proportion of the operational fund across the following. The categories are school districts with less than 750 membership or 750 students at 65%, school districts with greater than or equal to 750 mem at 75%, and charter schools at 68%. So here's a little bit of a breakdown of what the performance metrics looked like for FY21, and you can see that we're right in there with at the measures that were set forth in the GAA. Standard deviation analysis is a separate requirement that is included in the General Appropriations Act for 2020, and it required PED to conduct additional analysis of and identify districts and charter schools that were not prioritizing spending in certain areas of their respective budgets. Identified districts and charter schools that did not meet the threshold required additional budget review. So for this standard deviation analysis, the analysis calculates a cutoff of expenditure rates for dollars in the classroom and creates a threshold target of spending. And we created four groups of comparable entities. Comparable is mentioned in the GAA, and the categories that we used were districts less than 1,000 mem, districts equal to or greater than 1,000 mem, and less than 50,000 mem, and districts over 50,000 mem. And the charter schools were handled as a separate group. The cutoff rates for identification of additional oversight are as follows. Districts under 1,000 mem, we identified 8 districts for additional review. Districts equal to 1,000, and between 1,000 and 50,000, there were 5 identified for review. For 50,000, there was only 1 district over 50,000, and that district was identified for review, and 16 charter schools were identified for review. Schools were instructed to increase classroom spending to at least FY20 levels. So some of the challenges we had with the standard deviation methodology, and we have lots of people interested in this analysis, and these are some of the limitations. It doesn't relate directly to the agency performance metrics. So you saw earlier that we had other performance metrics. It doesn't tie directly to those performance metrics. It does not factor in raw dollar increases, which results in having to request for greater increases than planned. The methodology can be very difficult to explain to stakeholders, especially those that aren't familiar with statistical analysis. Another problem is that no matter how well school districts are doing, as long as you have any variation in the percentages, you're always going to identify some group of districts and charter schools, regardless of how well they're performing. There will always be a group of school districts and charter schools that are below one standard deviation. That seems like a problematic methodology. And the other thing is, especially during the pandemic, the push for more dollars in the classroom creates tension on the needs to increase operational costs, things like cleaning and maintenance and the kinds of things that districts are having to spend a lot more money on. This year, it's especially difficult as they make sure they have enough custodians and they have enough, money being invested in the operation of their facilities. Some other items that we're going to talk about due to solvency or other matters that impact FY21 operating budgets. We had the mid-year unit value reset due to solvency measures that require an additional SEG bar, changes to ELTP and K5 plus funded MEM for budgeted SEG amounts, and continued progress towards SB 96 requirements. Senate Bill 96 was passed during the 2020 legislative session. So a little bit about unit value. So due to solvency concerns, House Bill 1 from the special session required the Secretary to set a new preliminary unit value reflecting the reductions by August 1st, 2020. Considerations during the reset were largely limited to the appropriation reductions in HB1 for solvency and credits. Other considerations include forecasting of program units, growth units, local taxes, impact aid, half mill levy, forest revenue, driver's license fees, and save harmless. I think that's a typo. It says save harmless. So during the resetting of the unit value, PED had more precise data than the initial preliminary unit value setting around funding due to the availability of statewide third reporting period membership. We generally call that 120th day reporting, which would have happened in March. So when we reset the unit value, we had tighter data associated with membership. The two solvency reductions from HB1 during the special session were combined for a total reduction to available program cost of approximately $191 million. The funding amounts for ELTP and K5 Plus were removed from program cost to ensure separate tracking and reversion amounts. So this is something we've had to do the past 2 years because of language associated with reversion of funding specifically for ELTP and K5 Plus. We have to treat ELTP and K5 Plus funding a little bit different, even though it's SEG funding, because there is an expectation that we revert unused funds in those programs, and it ends up in the Educational Reform Fund. The availability of impact aid credits was unknown as of the unit value reset. So, still at the time of the second setting of the unit value, we had a lot of unknowns with impact aid, and we continue to have some unknowns associated with impact aid. The PED did, get aggressive on its unit value setting. The Secretary was pretty intent on trying to get as much money out to school districts as possible, school districts and charter schools as possible. We took an aggressive approach to setting that unit value, including some language that was included in HB1 that would give the Secretary access to approximately $29.1 million from the State Support Reserve Fund, pending outcomes from the impact aid proceedings. Changes for K5 Plus and ELTP. The ELTP and K5 Plus program have undergone many shifts. Originally, budgets were developed with MEM counts that averaged the second and third reporting date from the previous year. However, as we saw many shifts coming about with K5 Plus and ELTP, a decision was made that we would essentially reevaluate the plans of every charter school to be implementing these programs. And if there wasn't an approved plan, that money was backed out of the SEG if they weren't planning to run a program this year. October SEG will reflect similar changes. We made the first changes in September. We expect some additional changes in October. The idea is that we want to allow as many districts as possible to use this funding to make up for lost instructional time during the pandemic. A little bit on SB 96. So it's an online school budget reporting requirement. So it requires the development of an online statewide financial reporting system based on a standard chart of accounts by December 31st, 2021. It allows for collection and reporting of budget and expenditure data at the school site and REC level. The development of the system is in process, including chart of accounts definitions, requirements for standardized financial information system alignment, analysis of current local capacity, and parameters of an portal, an online portal that would be used to display the information to the public. Here's a little bit of a timeline for SB 96. We'll continue through the current fiscal year using the current OBMS structure. OBMS is the operating budget management system. It's the financial software, online software that's used to gather all this information from the schools. We're working on modifications to OBMS with upgrades completed by the second quarter of SY school year 21-22. Transfer of data to the upgraded OBMS will be executed in November of 21 and testing through December 21. System is anticipated to be in place by December 31st, 21. Testing and adjustment of the system will continue for the remainder of the school year, and full implementation is anticipated by July of 2022. A little bit on cash balances. So you have included in your handout some of the most current information on cash balances. Something I'll point out is that the more timely the data is, the less accurate it is. And the more accurate it is, the longer it takes to get it, even as far as, a year and a few months out when we get, final audited cash balances. But the other thing that I'll want to do is, as much as possible, I can't strain this enough, that this is probably the year that we need to least look at leveraging cash balances out in the schools. Schools are dealing with just an unbelievable number of unprecedented challenges and trying to figure out how to fund everything, from additional transportation costs to deliver meals and social distancing requirements on bus routes, to paying for things that they just normally wouldn't have to pay for, like additional sanitization after a potential infection, and additional personnel to handle some of the requirements. Some districts are hiring bus aides to make sure that they're doing temperature screenings before students get on buses. There are just so many new costs that weren't present before. So I want to caution about, especially this year, in looking at cash balances in the districts as a remedy for revenue shortfalls. CARES and ESSER funding. So I also included in your packet is a breakdown of the categories that have been requested during the CARES, the ESSER funding release. So there's 108 million associated with this. 90% of it goes directly to LEAs based on Title I proportions. And it's budgeted by districts according to CARES allowable uses to the allowable uses from the feds. The 41% credit that was mentioned during the special session has caused a lot of misunderstandings out in districts. And I've met with, we've had calls with superintendents. I've been on meetings with federal program directors. And one of the problems is that it was essentially listed as SEG, the credit was taken as SEG. And that, the CARES funding isn't a direct replacement for SEG. The CARES funding still has to be spent around CARES program requirements, and it's still federal funding. So the mention of it as credit taken for CARES during the special session caused a lot of misunderstandings that we're still working through this year. And in your handout, you have a breakdown of those the categories that districts and charter schools budgeted. So in conclusion, PED will continue to implement provisions looking to provide better transparency related to district and charter school spending decisions, and it is looking forward to the ability for all stakeholders to have increased levels of transparency and around educational spending in the state. PED also hopes to continue to expand and develop the educational plan approval process and review operational fund spending in consideration of SEG appropriation considerations. There are a lot of things going on at PED. Some of this was mentioned in this presentation. We're also doing a lot to improve our data systems, including a revision to our STARS data submission process, and getting to a place where we have much better data systems to make informed decisions about everything that we do. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members, and I'll stand for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Delgado. And what we'll do is we'll save questions until all the presenters have spoken. And if you want to ask a question, please raise your hand. If you're not in the, well, raise your hand when you're in here, but also raise your hand online, and Rachel will make sure that I know who wishes to speak. And with that note, I'd like to introduce a former colleague, a current superintendent of Logan Public Schools, and the new president of the New Mexico School Superintendents Association, Mr. Dennis Roche. In just a second. There we go.
Thank you. Well, Madam Chair and Madam Vice Chair, it's a pleasure to be back before you, members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation. So interesting, I thought we would probably start with a revisiting of my appearance before your committee 2 months ago. So 2 months ago, I highlighted some re-entry challenges that superintendents were facing. And interestingly, 2 months have passed and the exact same challenges face us today. Now, I know that some of them I talked about 2 months ago were specifically around re-entry decisions and planning and implementation. And today's focus is on budget, but I will tell you from a district perspective, those are inextricably linked. Every re-entry decision, every challenge, every hurdle to navigate requires budgetary flexibility. So I'll just tell you, the three things I identified in July were the one-size-fits-all approach is making it difficult. The ever-changing landscape, new guidance makes it difficult. And then understanding our relationship with PED it also makes it a little difficult. So just some examples. So on that first point, the reentry guidance failing to differentiate between districts. A clear example that's pretty recent is a requirement that came out right before schools went into the hybrid model Labor Day weekend. Is a new requirement that all school HVAC systems be fitted with MERV 13 filters, which is a certain density of filter that helps screen out particulate matter the size of viruses. The difficulty is not all schools have HVAC units that are compatible with MERV 13 filters. And so it could be a great expense to upgrade not just the filters, but the units. It also ignored the fact that some districts had just recently upgraded their filters to something less than MERV 13. And some districts don't even have HVAC type systems that even use a filter. There are still school districts in New Mexico that use evaporative cooling systems. They don't require a filter, geothermal systems. So there's a lot of diversity in the districts. And unfortunately, this requirement didn't take into account that diversity and obviously is hitting budgets as well as reentry hurdles. So reentry is also a moving target, the constant uncertainty. The latest example, I'll give you two examples. One is everybody in schools had been planning all summer to provide face coverings to make sure that students and staff had a face covering. The early reentry guidance from PED said that could be a mask, it could be a face shield, which actually has some efficacy for education in the youngest grades when students need to see the teacher's lips for phonemic awareness and those kinds of things, language acquisition. It's also very helpful in English language learner programs or with special ed students. But we were having masks, face shields, and even gaiters. Different face coverings were allowed. So districts spent nearly $500,000 on that kind of PPE. And then right before Labor Day, right before districts were able to transition into the hybrid model, they suddenly said, oh no, it has to be masks. And so all that equipment potentially went in the trash or at least was unusable under the new rules that changed pretty much overnight. Another example that I've listed here on the slide, is 50% caps. So all along, there was the requirement that schools going into reentry had to have 6-foot social distancing, which we were able to accommodate, whether that's through an A-B model in a large school or smaller schools using unusual spaces to spread students out. 6 feet would be safe, and we were able to accommodate that. Right there at the beginning of Labor Day weekend, we got a new rule that said, oh no, it's not about 50% in the building or 6-foot distancing. You also have to say a 50% hard cap on every roster of students. So the scenario that I have shared with the secretary and others is this. You have a classroom of 20 students. It has to be broken down into 10 and 10. And then you have a classroom next door that has 10 students on the roster. 10 in the one group, the first group, is safe. But in the second group, 10 is no longer safe. And now we've got to break it down to 5 and 5. And you might think, oh no, that's just a function of small districts that have 20s and 10s in the, no, large districts as well may have a special education classroom with a much smaller roster next to a regular education classroom with a large roster. You may have an English language learner program, a bilingual program with a smaller roster. So the inconsistency in this sort of artificial cap is not only frustrating in the planning process, but also potentially expensive, as hours and hours and hours were spent on creating these plans, and they have to go back to the drawing board. In addition, that may require staffing in a whole new way, and may require subs or other kinds of staffing models to be utilized. Use of spaces that weren't prepared to hold students now may have to be prepared to hold students. So you can see that every reentry decision is tied to budgetary expenditures in every case. That is not me making a phone call.
Will you all, whomever is using a phone, will you mute your microphone so the speaker can continue?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the third slide that kind of harkens back to my July presentation is sometimes PED has a tendency to vacillate. One day they want to be in supportive districts, we're here to help you, we're here to offer assistance. The next day it sort of feels like the hammer, it's compliance and enforcement. We talked about that early in the summer. The latest example for that is, all districts have received a toolkit, and we had to verify, superintendents, district leaders, and charter leaders as well, had to verify that all of these safety requirements were met. Educational leaders take seriously the expectation that we provide an assurance in writing. People did that. They got all their ducks in a row. They adjusted to the new requirements, even at great cost, and signed assurances and sent them in. Well, that signed assurance from an education leader certified by the state and licensed apparently wasn't sufficient, and fire marshals had to be sort of deputized to go out and double check and watch over our shoulders. That was a little frustrating, and it kind of highlights again, that confusing relationship between PED and LEA leaders. The bottom line is we're prepared and committed to providing a safe reentry for all students and staff. And we've asked PED in writing to treat us as a trusted partner. You probably have received a letter the Superintendent's Association sent to Secretary Stewart, basically saying, we appreciate the Zoom conferences and the continued conversation, but we need some expertise from the field in on the decision-making about these kinds of new, ever-changing, evolving guidelines. And we hopefully will get that invitation, and we've offered some specific recommendations about how to make improvements. Now, specifically to funding, some of the questions that were posed to our association today, and I'm gonna speak sort of from the association level, and then I'm pleased to be joined by some colleagues that are gonna share their district-by-district individual stories. In general instructional spending, I'll just tell you, the greatest fear I hear and we talk about as an association is superintendents are fearful about what the enrollment fluctuations from this year to next year, or from last year to this year, are going to mean for next year's budget. Because as you know very well, the budget is based on prior year funding. Well, last year's enrollment was what it was. It was normal sort of school year, the way we started. And this year's funding is based on last year's numbers. Well, next year's funding is going to be based on this year's numbers, and we are scared. I'll just tell you, we are scared. The PED reports homeschool numbers, enrollments are up about 50% over last year at this time. In addition, especially districts in border counties are seeing students and families seek educational access outside of the state. They're leaving to go to other states where classes are meeting in person and athletic activities are occurring on Friday nights under the lights. That's tricky. That's really hard. We've also seen transfers and people choosing GEDs versus pursuing a traditional diploma. In my own district, we've lost about 17 students. Now you might say, gosh, 17, that's not very big. But my district is about 300 students. That's over 5%. That can have a huge impact on next year's budget if we don't make allowances for that. I'll tell you another discussion we're having is the at-risk funding. I know Deputy Secretary Delgado just presented to you on the at-risk funding procedures and the reporting procedures, but what I want to highlight is when the SEG was reduced in the special session this summer, it also therefore reduced at-risk funding because at-risk funding is embedded into the SEG. And so when it reduces at-risk funding, it actually hamstrings our ability to serve the students most in need of those services, those required under the Yazzie-Martinez ruling. And then in addition, all the budget documents we put together in the spring that align with what Deputy Secretary Delgado just described, we created plans based on what we thought school might look like. But it doesn't look like that today in September of 2020. And so we are struggling to be able to provide the services we described. And when we have to produce at-risk reports next spring about what we actually spent it on, you're just gonna need to know we won't have the ability to spend it the way we thought we would, that we planned to, that we prepared for because of the challenges we're facing. Let's talk a little bit about new program participation. I know that's on your radar. K-5 plus programs were absolutely stymied. Teachers sometimes are leery of coming back into the building. You've heard that in the press, you've heard that from teacher groups. Families also have made choices not to bring their students back in person or have clamored for other options. When you don't have the teacher commitment or the family commitment, your K-5 plus program model blows up because you have to have both parts there. I'll just tell you, there are about 250 LEAs in New Mexico between 89 districts and over 150 charters. About 250 LEAs. This year there are 17 LEAs participating in K-5 plus, 17. That's not a very big number, and you can see the reasons why. Extended learning time programs, we actually saw some higher interest in extended learning programs, adding those programs to budgets. Although I will say it might have been because the language of the special session solvency bill had a little coercion in it. It said, you will do it or you must justify why you're not adding the extra time. So there's a little coercion in that language, but there are still some districts that jumped in and said, we want to do it. Here's the problem is even those that applied, some of their applications were disapproved on technicalities like not submitting a district budget or not getting their extra after-school program requirements meeting the statutory requirements. The other thing is that we have extended learning time is facing the same challenges as K-5 plus. If there's an after-hours an after-school program requirement, how can you conduct that when you can't even have kids in school during the regular school day? How do you have additional days when we're not even meeting students on traditional instructional days in person? So a lot of these challenges compound when you get into these additional programs. Talk briefly about instructional materials budgets. Districts are seeing unforeseen costs in this area as well. I'll just give an example from my own district. Our world history class, for example, was using a 2012 textbook. And you might say, gosh, 2012, that's some, 8 years old. You can't have a history book that's 8 years old. Well, in world history, Greek and the Byzantine Empire and the Ming Dynasty, that stuff doesn't change in 12 years. So I think we were safe using, but the problem we ran into was we're in a remote only option at the beginning of the year, and the 2012 publication didn't have online options. It didn't have digital access tools for the teacher or for the students. So we had to upgrade to the 2018 edition, which had all the digital tools, great for kids, but it wasn't something we budgeted for because we're out of cycle on the adoption for social studies. So again, an unforeseen cost, and I know these are costs that other districts have experienced as well. The spring adoption cycle last spring when we were adopting new materials also was challenging because you have to have a public participation. You invite parents and community in to review your textbooks. You couldn't bring people into the building. Campuses were shuttered by executive order. And so it was a little tricky to conduct that process. The other thing is, when you're in a digital world, you not only need a textbook with a digital component, you got to have internet access. You got to have devices for students to access those things. And instructional materials funds aren't eligible to be used on those kinds of things. Now everybody just says, oh, just use your CARES funding. I promise you the CARES Act funding has been spent 3 or 4 and 5 times over because of PPE needs, digital access, et cetera. And so it just isn't sufficient. As I wrap up these kind of overall observations from the Association of Superintendents, I'm gonna list 3 requests in closing. We ask you as the legislature, please consider extending some statutory deadlines. One that has come to mind is Attendance for Success Act, and we believe students need to be in school. The difficulty is we have a report coming up in October that's in statute. We have to provide data for you and plans and targets and how do we intervene for students who aren't present. Well, all of these reports are based on last year's data, which is incomplete because kids stopped coming at spring break. And we also have attendance this fall looking entirely different than it ever has. So it's going to be tricky for us to identify a plan and identify interventions, because how do you even deliver those interventions for the kids that are chronically absent or chronically truant? Another request is, we know that there may be some effort to, well, we've got to get salaries up to try to adjust, try to reduce turnover. Yeah, we're not opposed to salary increases, although it's got to be funded or a bus, breaks the bank at the district level. However, we urge you to look at teacher turnover not necessarily as a function of salary or benefits this year. Teacher turnover this year will likely be driven by the stress of the pandemic, the forced sort of quick change to an online digital model. There will be a lot of other issues that cause people to leave the profession or leave the state, but probably will not be exclusively attributable to wages. And then the last thing we would say is, it goes back to the fear that I mentioned in the beginning. We really need the legislature to offer some notwithstanding language in the next General Appropriation Act that says, gosh, if enrollments have tanked like they have, we can't build budgets for next year on this year's enrollment because it's not going to be the same, it's not going to be true. So maybe some hold harmless language, maybe we take a higher or an average over time. And in fact, we've already reached out to the LFC staff and they've graciously agreed to work with us on some language. PED has also agreed to work with us on language. Other partners like the AFT, the NEA, the School Boards Association, all of us have this as a joint priority, and I want to get it on your radar right away. We do appreciate the opportunity to present. I shared with you in my slide presentation a couple little memes that highlight the challenge of starting this year with our youngest students. You can't just tell a kindergarten student, just log on, it's going to be great, you're 5 years old, So that's a little tricky. And then of course, the mask requirement, the kids actually in my school are doing much better than the adults. They're more resilient than we are, but obviously kids may be tempted to also trade and not recognize the hygiene risk associated with that. But thank you for the opportunity to present. We'll stand for questions at the end.
Thank you, Superintendent Rush. We really appreciate it. Before I go on to our next presenter, I just want to make sure that Senator Souls and Senator Brandt introduce themselves very quickly. Senator Souls?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's nice to get here. I flew up, so there were some headwinds today, so it was a little bit slow. And in fact, make sure I had enough fuel, I stopped at Double Eagle to get some extra fuel on the way up, so I'm a little late. It's nice to be here. Thank you.
Senator Brandt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Brandt, Rio Rancho, Senate District 40, and I just want to know if Bill Souls' arms are tired or not since he flew up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to be here. And Representative Joanne Ferrari from House District 37 in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you. Dr. Elder is my wife, so thank you. It's an honor to be here today. Thank you all very much. My presentation today, I plan to just kind of zip through because I know your time is incredibly valuable and you've had an opportunity to look at it. So I'll be sort of reviewing the annual budget that we presented for fiscal year 2021. In the presentation, I want to address a few concerns about the unit value, what that had impact on our current budget, and what that meant for instructional spending, our at-risk funds, program participation, and instructional materials. And I'm supposed to turn and ask, is this working? This is good, thank you. All right. So the unit value, there have been some questions concerning the actual percentage decrease that was determined from the special session of June of 2020. So two amounts have been in discussion. One is 1.56% and the other is 4.76%. And what I want to say is that both are true. The 1.56 decrease was based on the final unit value of fiscal year 20. So last school year that was at 4602. The 4.76% decreased is based on the original unit value that was set for fiscal year 21. So that was 4758. Now why that's important and why we stand on that 4.76% number is this is the amount that our fiscal year 21 budget was built on and approved by our various boards of education and specifically from APS on May 18th. The notice of reduction was given after the special legislative session in June 2020. Our final notice from PED, which arrived on September 9th, shows this decrease. So if you look at the unit values awarded on July 1st, it was 4758, but the PED notices of 9/9 was 4531. Again, it's a matter of how you look at it, what original unit value you use. Both numbers are completely legitimate. It's just, I wanted people to understand why sometimes APS and the districts are saying it was a 4.76 decrease. And if you look here, you can see that when the revised SEG award came out, APS was facing a budget reduction of approximately $41 million. We recouped some of that from the removal of the 4% increase to the tune of about $26.5 million. But with the estimated 1% increase for STEM staff of $5 million, it left us with a total budget challenge of $19 million. Why is there that deficit? The legislative session took credit for 41% of the CARES Act funding, which decreased the SEG statewide. For APS, the CARES Act credit reduced the SEG amount by approximately $10.5 million. Remember, we do have to allocate some of our CARES award to dependent charter schools and private nonprofit schools. We gave about $4.5 million that way. Some other factors that impacted our budget was the 1% increase for certain employees, which was a cost of about $5 million. And then we had a change in units for participation in extended learning and elementary PD, which cost another $4 million. So, I'd like to point, excuse me?
I need to announce to those of you who are listening online, we're still having problems and there's an effort, concerted effort to make sure that the problem with the mics are fixed. I knew that. For those of you who are online, just a moment. There's a problem with the sound system online and we're still working to get it fixed, so please be patient. Thank you. Go ahead, Dr. Elder.
Thank you. So one point I'd like to make on the 41% reduction of the CARES Act funding, because of that reduction to SEG, we had to figure out how to cover that $10 million because those recurring costs were not necessarily available under the CARES Act funding. So a lot of times you'll hear, use the CARES Act money, but a lot of the costs that are recurring do not count in the CARES Act, so it's important to note that 10 million was significant. Superintendent Roche mentioned that one of the concerns for districts across the state is enrollment considerations. In APS, we are currently looking at a decrease in students of approximately 4,000. This comes from the comparison of the 80-day count to the most recent registration count as of 9/15. That decrease of 4,000 students equates to approximately 150 FTE of school staff and approximately $36 million in SEG funding. This means that fiscal year 22 is a concern due to forward funding. We assume that many of these students will return. It's consistent across the state, it's consistent across the nation that the largest reductions have been at the pre-K and the K level. And we believe that many families are simply taking what we're calling a red shirt year, and they're holding their kids back for that 1 year to give time for the vaccine to be created and for medical considerations to improve. Those students, we fully anticipate will return next year, and the state is going to have an interesting issue for the next 13 years. We could be looking at a kindergarten class of 150% of projection, perhaps even higher. And so if there is no hold harmless for next year, if we are short 36 million, and let's just say half of those students return, we'll still be short $18 million, and that's going to be consistent across the state. There were additional costs to cover this year, the SEG deficit of 19 million. For us, we bought an online system. Our teachers were calling out for some support in the classroom. We used Edgenuity, that was 4.3. We also expanded our virtual school from 9 through 12 to K-8 based on parental concern. And then the PPE costs were about $11.5 million. So when you look at the additional costs for online curriculum, costs for opening an all online K-8, and costs for personal protective equipment, CARES Act only went so far. So how did we cover it? You can see here that we had to use some operational monies. Across the line, top of the line, you can see the costs, and down below you can see where we were able to use CARES Act funding, Title I funding. We are anticipating a FEMA grant to support quite a bit of this, and then some of the money did have to come from operational. But we're still at a situation where we're going to have to look at school level attrition to cover about $8 million of operational deficit. The hope here is that the number of students that have not returned will balance out, and we're going to do most of that through vacancy savings. We have been able to avoid a RIF at this time, and I do not anticipate that occurring. But moving into next year, again, if there isn't a hold harmless, we're going to have some significant concerns with how to fund our schools. I'd also like to point this out. Deputy Secretary Delgado mentioned the 75% of instructional funding. However, in House Bill 2, the Public Education Department shall not approve the operating budget of any school district or charter school with greater than or equal to 50,000 students that spends less than 80% of their general fund appropriations on instruction, support, student services, and instructional support services. So the point here is that while he mentioned that APS was held to the 75% rule, the budget really did call for 80% to go to instructional spending. We are the only district in the state that meets the language in House Bill 2, which I find somewhat interesting. And however, we did meet the 80% and our budget did go. But I'd like to point out, if you see instruction, student support services, and instructional support services in red there, as we move to the next screen, I'd like to show you what that means. So different functions equate to different job categories. And you can see that including the 80%, we have the function 1000, the obvious direct instruction categories, teachers, EAs, athletics, subs. In function 2100, you see student support such as athletics, audiologists, counselors, fine arts, interpreters. And in function 2200, you see instructional support, librarians, and media specialists. However, included in the 20% is function 2400, which includes school administration, principals, assistant principals, secretaries, and the costs associated with the administrative responsibilities in the school. Since state law requires a principal in a school, I believe that function 2400 really should be included in the instructional student support services. You could also look at some of the supplemental services such as transportation, food service, and community service, which directly flows to students, which is also not included in the 80%, which we believe it should be. If you adjust that, then APS jumps to 86% of its money flows directly to student instruction. And I think you would see the other districts have a significant increase in their instructional spending as well. We think it's a reasonable accommodation. So the financial impact of the 80-20 requirement, you can sort of see here how he had to really do a lot of shifting and really, quite frankly, we made significant cuts, mostly through vacancy savings, to meet the 80-20 rule. And if you need more information on that, I do have a budget officer online today that can answer those questions. Looking at the at-risk funds, the district generated $74 million for fiscal year 21 based on the unit value. I was here a few weeks ago and I presented on at-risk versus PPE per pupil expenditure. So you know that each school in our district has a unique at-risk index and that school principals have to provide a narrative justifying the at-risk use. We had $14 million directly distributed to school sites for local decisions. And then you can see here a list of some of the things that we use for the at-risk dollars, which include nursing, social services, refugee services, community programs, tutoring, and so on. As far as program participation, we do have K-5 plus. We have 2 schools and 3 charter schools. ELTP, we have 11 schools for 2021. These does include our former MRI schools, and the Genius Hour, which is the extended hour for those students. We did have a little decrease in ELTP and K-5 plus, but we did add 7 community schools, and we are still holding our 3 former MRI schools schedules, but only with ELTP funding, and we are supplementing with the operational dollar. In instructional materials, you see that the SEG included $30 million statewide. APS portion was approximately $7 million. The dual instructional materials funding was cut. This year, the adoption textbook purchases were for social studies and science. Superintendent Roche mentioned his textbook from 2012. That sounds pretty good to us because we have had a very difficult time keeping up with instructional materials because the estimated cost to maintain up-to-date adoptions and materials for all students is approximately $13 million annually, which is about $170 per student. With the increase of ebooks to support online and remote instruction, it just does increase the cost. So thank you, and that's my presentation today.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent Elder. And our next presenter, but before I announce the next presenter, yes, Dr. Trujillo. Before I announce our next presenter, please, those of you who are trying to be online, our WebEx is giving us problems, so connect with us on the regular legislative webcast. And if you have a question and you're online and you're a legislator, you can text me at 235-8783, 235-8783, and I'll put you on the list. Thank you. Dr. Trujillo.
Good morning.
Test. So good morning, Madam Chair, Vice President, members of the committee. It's an honor to be here with you this morning. I'll try to do my best to speak loudly so that people can understand and hear. I have been in Las Cruces Public Schools for the last year, and I think you'll see that all of the things that were mentioned by both Superintendent Roche and Superintendent Elder are similar across the state regardless of the size of the district. So if you look, I just have a slide that's very similar, confirming what Mr. Elder said about it both being a 1.4% reduction and a 4.5% reduction, based on all of the different things that we had to change and adjust after the June special session. Again, I just want to highlight one thing that was not mentioned by either of the 2 previous speakers, and that is that the school districts and the charters not paying more than the 6% for the health insurance this year basically just pushes that out to next year and the following year. So we're looking at potential double-digit increases in insurance moving forward. When we look at the timeline for the budget adjustments, I just think it's important for the committee members to understand that as district leaders, we received, the PED announced the new unit value on July 30th. We got the notification of our over $15 million reduction on September 9th, and we have to create a new operational budget by October 31st. When we look at taking out all of the different funds that were allowed for the 4% increase that got reduced to the 1% increase, taking out the PE allocations, taking out the transportation budget reduction, we ended up with a total reduction of 16.02 million. But when we remove all of those different pieces, our actual deficit in Las Cruces Public Schools is about 3.55 million. When we look at the struggles, it's very similar to all of the things that have been said before. We're not only losing funds, but we're losing teachers. So as students are choosing not to come back to school, we have teachers for health reasons that are also choosing not to come back to school. I really feel that Mr. Roche said it very well. I don't know that I could say it better, but that the target is ever moving, and we are ever having to adjust both our budgets, our buildings, the expectations, and what we are able to provide for our students and our communities. We are also seeing the loss of students. So when we ran our numbers on March 13th of 2020, we had an enrollment of 24,806 students. When we ran it on September 15th, it was down to 24,021 students. So it's approximately 800. The reduction primarily is in pre-K. So our pre-K reduction is over 250 students. However, we have lost 219 students that have chosen to go to homeschooling for this school year. What's going to happen is that next year, or as soon as we come back, they're coming back. So we're still going to need the teachers for those students. So again, I just want to advocate for that hold harmless in terms of the student enrollment. The other piece is really looking at the equity part of all of this. When we are able to bring back portions of our students to serve, but not others, there is that issue of equity that we have to deal with, especially in light of the Yazzie Martinez lawsuit. I know that's something that at the PED we stress, and at every district across the state we stress that, but we really do need to have the flexibility in each of our individual positions in each of our individual communities to make the right decisions for our students. We were hired to do that job. We all take it extremely seriously, and those considerations would be appreciated. When we look at the other expenditures and we talk about our CARES Act, taking the 41% credit for the CARES Act is almost equivalent, not quite, to our $3.5 million deficit. Ours was, I think, about 2.9, along with other expenditures. But there are things that we have to get, that we have to purchase, that we are restricted with those federal funds. What we've chosen to use those funds for, and also are operational, we purchased over 9,000 student devices because students can't work online if they don't have anything to work with. We've had to purchase over 300 hotspots and do at a cost of $778,000. We partnered with the city of Las Cruces to add internet essentials from Comcast that we as a district are paying for, thankfully with the partnership with the city of Las Cruces. Our Canvas accounts, last year at this time we had 2,000. At this time we have 30,000 individual Canvas accounts for every teacher, EA, administrator in the district, along with 24,500 students. That's an additional cost, and that will be recurring. When we look at the infrastructure and our software, you know, all of that has to be backed up by someone. There have to be people on the ground looking at our computers, making sure that they're working, making sure that the servers are working. Our technicians have been working 24 hours a day for the last 6 months. And for those of you who know, we also had a ransomware attack in November, which was really fun. So that was kind of like our baby tragedy, and then we had an intermediate tragedy in March, and now we're here. But it prepared us to be where we're at so that we can make good decisions. PPE and building adjustments, so putting up barriers in all of our front offices, making sure that we have water stations, that we have new water filling stations, just like you do here. All of that comes at a cost. So we're trying to be as creative as possible and looking at SB 9, HB 33, CARES Act, and operational funds across the board. When we look at at-risk funds and our curriculum resources, last year we spent about $2.8 million on dual language curriculum resources for English language learners, because when we looked at where we were lacking, it was in Spanish resources. So we made a significant investment this last year. However, on an annual basis for curriculum, we have to budget out of operations separate from our allocation for instructional materials to the tune of $2 to $3 million a year, because we want to have those digital resources, because we want to have those Spanish language resources, because we want to have things that are up to date and available for students both online and in the classroom. We also have international welcome centers at our middle school and high school students to support our English language learners, and a parent outreach and engagement department that really works directly with our migrant students, our homeless students, really trying to get to the root cause of those student needs and meeting them as best we can. Other use of our at-risk support, we have behavioral health, we have social workers in every school, we have a nurse or a nurse's assistant in every school, and we also have a connection center for those students that have those high flagged probabilities of dropping out, of falling off, and a system to kind of figure out how to keep them in play. However, we're finding that during this time, there are hundreds of students that now we're literally gonna have to figure out a way to go virtually knock on doors and find out what they are, what they need, and figure out how to support them. When we look at extended learning and K5+, this was a significant part of our budget reduction. We had planned on doing K5+ across the board for all of our elementary schools. Thankfully, on top of that, you get the extended learning funds for all of the membership in those schools. But when you pull out that K5+ application, you have to readjust your extended learning application. We did choose to do extended learning, but it is not school-wide. In other words, we did not change our calendar and add 10 extra days. I tried doing that in January. We did public meetings, we had the community, and they didn't want to have anything to do with it. So I did my very best to advocate for the 10 extended days and was not successful. However, we are doing that for our students that are most at need and most at promise. So we did add those 10 days at the end of the school year, and we're getting ready to start implementing our virtual after-school programs. But that's all we could do, and that's being hopeful, right? Hoping that in June we'll be able to add those 10 days at the end of the school year. Prioritizing our learners, the thing that this offers is teacher choice, so that it's not a forced participation on the part of either the child or the teacher, but it is optional. And to be very honest, if we look at adding that 10 extra days, it just doesn't necessarily cover all of the costs associated with what is needed by the students and what's expected by the teachers. So FY22 to FY28 or 25, if we're just looking and projecting 5 years out, the increasing cost of building upgrades. So when we look at our air filtration systems, this isn't unique to our district. We have newer buildings, we have older buildings. Our older buildings still do have swamp coolers. There were some that were slated to get new HVAC systems. That's not gonna change, but those costs are gonna continue to increase if the levels of filtration and air quality continue to increase. PPE only lasts so long. I mean, that mask that you're wearing is gonna last a certain amount of time. We have disposables, we have the gowns for special education. All of those are gonna need to be replaced on a regular basis. When we look at our workforce requirements, if you have aides on the buses to take temperatures, teachers saying like, well, that's not my job, I'm not gonna do that. Someone's gonna have to do all of those things. So we're looking at workforce requirements, and we don't know what those are gonna be. To be very honest, our CARES Act funds are close to depleted, if not depleted already. We spend a significant amount of our CARES Act funds for professional development for our teachers throughout the summer. 13,500 hours of professional development, because we knew that teachers, like, whether you're hybrid or you're virtual, you're going to need to know how to work in an online environment. So we made heavy, heavy investments in our course development, building the Canvas courses for our teachers, giving them the opportunity to build it for themselves, hiring Canvas captains at every school site that teachers could go to and say, I need help putting in an assignment, I need help doing whatever. So that was a significant investment, and that's what we chose to use part of our CARES Act funds for. But they're not going to be there forever. And every time we hear, oh, just use your CARES Act for that, you say, well, yeah, but that's not available anymore. New building projects. We are in the midst of doing an ed spec study in the city of Las Cruces, and unlike some places, we're growing. There are places in our community that are growing, and they're telling us that we're going to need between 2 and 3 new elementary schools in the next 10 years. Those funds are going to have to come from somewhere. And the district needs of maintaining that local control of funds and expenditures. I just want to reiterate again what all of the 3 previous speakers said. Mr. Delgado from the PED saying, you know, right now, those of us who have those funds available in our districts are using them to be creative and meet the needs of our communities. If we are unable to do that with our cash balances, that's going to be something that is extremely detrimental, not only to the districts, but to the students that we serve. So I would hope and ask you humbly to consider that hold harmless for our student enrollment count and to allow us the freedom to maintain our operations by allowing us to use our cash balances for what we need. And last but not least, really taking into account the fact that this past year, you know, through the pandemic that hit in March, we had probably between $2 and $3 million worth of items that were encumbered, funds that were encumbered. Yep, you'll get it by July 1, you'll get it by July 1. Well, it came in on July 5th. So all of that is reflected in our cash balance, even though we still had to pay those things off. So just want to make sure that all of those things are taken into consideration. And I, like the others, will be available to answer questions at the end. So thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Dr. Trujillo. And our next presenter, but before we go, again, my number is 505-235-8783 for legislators who have questions, since we are doing webcast and not WebEx. Our next presenter is the Superintendent of Rio Rancho Schools, Sue Cleveland. Are you on?
I can't hear anything. I hear anything now.
If you can speak directly into the mic, it would be really helpful. Thank you. Go ahead.
Don't forget to unmute when it's time.
Did you get the foundation?
Didn't get them, but I sent an email. I'm gonna watch, I'm gonna call again.
Okay.
Nobody's picking up over there.
I thought I had Rick's phone number on here, but I don't, so I can't text him.
It starts at 12.
We can hear you now. Thank you.
I thought it was 11:30.
Well, I checked it.
Go ahead and start.
That was on my calendar, 11:30.
Go ahead and open your microphone.
I'm muted. No, I'm not muted. Okay. All right.
Sue, we can hear you.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And hold on a second. This is a new software for me. So share.
Yes.
What do I share? Screen or application?
Let's try screen.
Or
Screen.
Okay.
And then choose the real one.
This one. There you go.
And then share.
And then share. Are we good to go?
Yes. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Madam Chairperson and members of the committee, it's a pleasure to be with you today. I am not there in person, but I do appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts. As you get a little bit on down the program, a lot of things have been covered. And so I will try not to spend a lot of time on those things that have already been addressed. I would just want to begin by just making a few general comments. I hope that the committee, and I'm sure that you do understand that nothing is the same. There isn't one thing that is the same this year that we have had to deal with, in the past. And so it has required a tremendous amount of flexibility and looking at things very differently. But I think people have tried very hard to pull together and move forward, be successful. But it is a very challenging time for our staff, for our families, for the community. And so it is we are in a very interesting period of time. And having done this job a long time, I've never had a year quite like this one. And even as we worked our way through the Great Recession, the challenges were not even as great as they are right now in many respects. So it is an interesting time. And so one of the things I think you keep hearing through all the presentations and all of the comments is a need for flexibility, a need for agility, a need to be able to take some things off the plate. And so I think that's, I would just kind of like to set the framework for that. It is a very interesting year. Okay, I'm trying to move down. All right, now that other one didn't work. All right, on prior year funding, you've already heard a lot of comments about it. I would want you to know that we are down 789 students, and we are in the process of trying to find them all. So it's not only that we've lost them. Generally, when you lose students, you know where they are, and you get requests for records from another district, or there are many different ways that we find our students. And like some of the other districts, we are working with Canvas and trying to reach out to those families who have just simply cut off communication with their schools. And it's a slow process, but we've never been in a time when we didn't know where all of our students were. And so it worries me because I'm not sure in some cases what kind of educational opportunities our children are having. It will also have a tremendous impact next year, as I believe many of those students will return. And so again, the funding formula that we've always used is not going to work very well this year, particularly related to prior year funding. I want to talk about two topics that have been addressed, but have always been important topics to us, and I know they are across the state. And that is the issue of transportation and instructional materials. And I wish, I could say something more positive about transportation. This has been a very pressing issue for our district for many years. We are going to run another deficit of about $1 million. When we talk about the amount of funding that Rio Rancho gets per pupil, in reality, you should just pull $1 million off the bottom of that because that money is coming straight out of our classrooms. And I know that I'm not the only district that is facing those challenges. This year, we are going to have far less students that are being transported, but most of the costs are going to stay the same. Maybe we'll have a few less stops because we'll have less children, but more than likely we're going further between stops. And the cost for drivers, the cost for fuel, the cost for maintenance, all those things are going to stay the same. And so transportation is an area that we're very concerned about. The other is instructional materials. I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail on that, except that was an important area that we have tried to address as a state. We have some very important adoptions coming up, such as mathematics, and we have made some progress in that area. And so I hope we can continue to make progress in being able to get those materials. In addition, there have been other expenses for materials that kind of came out of nowhere. For example, AP materials for Edgenuity, or all of the materials that we needed to be able to live and work successfully in a digital remote environment. And so there have been a lot of unanticipated costs related to instructional materials, in addition to just fully funding the adoptions and the need to do that, and the need to do that in a comprehensive manner, and the need to do that in terms of culturally responsive materials as well. I'm sure you're very much aware that transportation and instructional materials were specifically addressed by the judge in Yazzie Martinez. And so those are areas that that Judge Singleton identified as being significantly underfunded and needed to be addressed by the state of New Mexico. But there have just been so many different things that have happened this year related to not only transporting students, but for example, the cost of cleaning the buses, just the time and the cost for the cleaning supplies and the personnel to get those buses cleaned. We're cleaning between every tier. And so there are some additional costs there. And again, for instructional materials, a lot of things that we didn't count on, but the basic funding for an adoption is short as well. I know that the issue always comes up, especially when times are so tight and times are hard, to look at cash balances. And one of the things I would want to share with you is that we have right now some additional cash balance. And the reason that we have that is that we have so many vacancies in the district right now. And so we are saving that cash, but we're not able to fill our positions. Even during other hard times, such as the Great Recession, was never short 130 positions. And so across the district, there's 130 slots that are not filled. Well, very much like the Great Recession, there is nobody there to take those jobs. So our pool is very thin. And so the only way we find more people, someone move in or into the area or whatever, but there's no bench behind us. And I even said during a board meeting that we were streaming one night, I hope the community be good to their teachers because there's nobody behind them should they become ill or should they decide not to work in this environment. So it is, we have some savings that are coming about as a result of that, but we need to fill those positions. And one of the ones that, here is mentioned teachers, bus drivers, and custodians. I can tell you there's another group that we're finding very, very hard to hire, and that is our substitutes. Because what we pay our substitutes, it's a risk to come into the school. In some cases, they don't have benefits, and therefore they're even less willing to expose themselves to the virus. And so we've got a lot of vacancies right now. Even with the money we receive from our bond and SB 9 elections, our preventative maintenance program is suffering. And I thought the other day when we were looking at some of the needs that we have, I thought a little bit about former Speaker Lujan and his passion for preventative maintenance programs and taking care of our investment. In the last many years, we have invested a lot of money, both locally and statewide, in our school facilities. And where we're going again is that, the money that we invested to build those buildings or to renovate or whatever, we're beginning to see those gains deteriorate because there is not the money to take care of them. And so that's an important issue for us. I believe it is for other districts as well. And then I would add on top of that, and I'll mention that again a little later, is we've had a lot of new things that were unanticipated related to COVID-19. And so we would like to use some of those, we'd like some flexibility to be able to address some of those challenges, such as the need to upgrade our fire alarms or some of those COVID expectations or even some emergency situations that we have had related to drainage. I wanted to just show you this because of a couple of things. One of them is what we put into information technology this year as a result of moving to a remote environment the first part of the year. And the purpose in showing this to you is a couple of things. One is so that you could maybe have an understanding of the patchwork that we kind of have to do to accomplish things. So there's a little money from CARES, which honestly we could have spent or probably did, 2 times over. The operational dollars and SB9, and so by putting those together, we were able to provide better technology opportunities for our students, and most of our students have been able to function fairly effectively in a digital environment. We have, like everyone, sometimes people think in a more urban area, there are no challenges, in terms of connectivity. And there's nothing that could be further from the truth in that. There's some areas of Rio Rancho that are much older, and we have some areas that are west of the community that are quite rural. And so getting everyone connected has been a real challenge, but we've had a great team and they've stepped forward. We partnered with our primary deliverer of it used to be Cable One, it's now Sparklight. But we've had to also deal with all of the people who deliver in our area. And so that's kind of a complex situation. It's not just one company, but several. And we have been able to work that out and develop some partnerships. As you can see, we're providing 320 homes with hotspots and 338 homes with internet connection. We aren't done yet, but we are a lot further along. Sometimes we don't always look at the opportunities and we don't look at the positives. And I believe without any doubt, as we have moved to have more of our children in our district and throughout the state of New Mexico connected, we have opened a window for them, opened opportunities for them. And most people that get connectivity don't give it up. It's kind of like your cell phone. Once you get one, you never give it up. And I believe that it will create many opportunities for our students and our families and help them move into the world that we live in today. So I think our staff are more technologically proficient than they used to be. We've all been learning an awful lot. So there are some real positives in terms of the technology piece. We're certainly not there yet, but I do believe it has been a tremendous benefit to many of our families, some of our neediest families, who now are connected. We've talked a little bit earlier, some have, about personal protective equipment. I think we are making pretty decent progress in terms of getting it for the average staff member and students. We were short of children's masks to be able to open, and just want to thank Scott Elder publicly for stepping forward and allowing us to borrow that so that we were able to move forward with it. But there's still one area that I think is still critical. And I think we aren't doing at all what we need to do in that area. And we really need to have a concerted effort to provide a much higher level of protective equipment for those staff members who are working with some of our special education students, some of our students who have to be diapered and changed, some of our students who are physically aggressive, some of our students who have tracheotomy issues, and these people should have a whole different level of protection, the medical level protection, if we want them to work with our children. And so I know that Public Ed Department is aware of that. We're trying to work toward that goal, but we need better, higher level protective equipment for a good number of our staff, such as teachers who work with children with disabilities, such as teachers who work with children in some other ancillary capacities, our nurses and some others. And so I think we need to continue to really look at what keeps our staff safe and be sure that we're able to provide that. I've already mentioned this. If there ever was a year that we could have some flexibility in this area, it would really be helpful for us to be able to meet some of the needs that we have. I understand the intent of that intent of money going into the classrooms, and we very much support that. On the other hand, if you have vacancy savings, you're not able to put that into personnel. You can certainly put it into some programmatic things, but it's non-recurring. And so for, having some short-term flexibility would be great. We did our reentry plan. It has been approved by the state. I was asked to give a little bit of information on our opening. We are the largest district. There are several smaller districts in New Mexico who are open in a hybrid model now. And so I was asked, how is that going? And it's going pretty well. I think we put a lot of time and effort into being ready to bring students back. It is a challenge, and it is we face a lot of challenges every day, and we worry every day. But so far we have had pretty good experiences. We have had one COVID confirmed student, and the processes that were set down by the Department of Health and the Public Ed Department and the Department of the Environment, we followed those processes, and I think they worked fairly smoothly. We are looking to kind of debrief in our own district to see if there's anything that we could do better. But our processes worked, and the response that we got from the state worked. And so I think we've got some refining to do, but I think we've got some good things in place. I will tell you, the children were very excited to come back to school, and we are adhering to all of the requirements of the social distancing and the mask and all of those things. We do have some tablets that are outside our school, and every child is scanned as they come in, and it does tell the temperature. There's another expense that nobody really thought much about, but these tablets allow us in a district with very large numbers of children in buildings to be able to have their temperature scanned quickly and to get into the building in a very short period of time. The very nice thing about these scanners is that not only will allow large schools to scan students, but it immediately identifies someone who is not supposed to be in that building. And so it is, that's been a very interesting, a very useful process for us. But we think things are going very well. As Superintendent Rush and others spoke to, the changing of requirements was very frustrating at times. The filter issue is a big issue in a district as large as Rio Rancho, and many of our HVAC systems couldn't tolerate that. But the agreement that we made with the Public Ed Department was that we would put the filter with the highest level that particular equipment could take in each school. And that has been a considerable cost because we have put all new filters in, and they were unfortunately 8s, and 9 is the base. And so we have reordered, and we are getting those in. The other thing, and again, we understand things change, but we're getting ready to open, and the issue that was addressed earlier of rosters changing, we did have to, of course, restructure all of our rosters for our elementary schools over the weekend when we got that done. And then we put another safety precaution in place that was asked by Secretary Stewart, and that was to make sure in the cafeterias that every class was isolated, and so that we built barriers between classes. And I do know that a lot of schools their children are eating in the rooms. We are not doing that, and I'll tell you why we are not. We may have a few classes if we can't get them in the cafeteria, but number one, we want a hot lunch for every child, and our buildings are large. And by the time you get the food out, it's probably not going to meet the standards in terms of temperature. The other is, the diversity of meals and not getting that cold sandwich every day. That was pretty important for a lot of our children. It's the only hot meal they get. And then the need to get up and move was certainly important. But the real reason, or the primary reason, at Rio Rancho, we sit out here on sand hills. And so we have a very significant mouse problem. And so if we started feeding children in the classroom, we were going to have other medical challenges. And so we did work with the public ed department. We built those barriers so that classes or cohorts are isolated during the lunch, and they do not interact with other children. And so we were able to meet most of those requirements. And like I said, we've been operational only a little over a week, but so far things are going very well. And the biggest concern, of course, is that we have had one child in one school, and the Department of Health did make the decision to close down that one classroom, but not the rest of the building. So we're continuing to learn. We've worked, tried to work very cooperatively with everyone to try to make this work. And but we worry all the time. We worry about the safety of our children, and we're trying to do everything that we can. One other thing I wanted to mention, I mentioned the filters. We also have a very, our facilities department is coming in quite early, and they're running those blowers 3 hours before we start. And then at the end of the day, we're blowing them for 3 more hours. We're opening dampers where we can. We're opening windows. We're doing everything to increase the airflow, which we've been told is just as important as the filters. And so, and if you're still on swamp coolers, and we have a few that are still left, you're probably in the best shape of all, because you're pulling in tremendous amount of external air, clean air. And but we're taking those extra precautions. Only reason I mention that to you is that by running those units an additional 6 hours a day and opening the dampers and the windows, we're going to see a significant increase in our utility bill. And so we know that, and we are willing to do that in order to keep our people safe. But that is another cost that a lot of times we don't think about. And the couple of other things I would like to just bring up. One is the CARES funding, and as new things would come up, and new needs and new expectations, kind of the response was sometimes, well, let's do our, use your CARES money for that. Well, our CARES money was gone by then, and so it became operational money, which is what I think everyone is saying is as much flexibility as you can give us this year, and allowing us to be able to meet the needs of our buildings, it would be appreciated. I want to just throw out real quickly, again, we worked well with NMCA, and we appreciate NMCA. A little concerned about some of the information that talked about liability. And, we got our information. I would like you to know that what we did is we trained our entire district leadership team, and we sent out a really clear message that we're going to follow the orders. We're going to do what we're asked to do. It was a little disconcerting to get something back that said, even if there's an unintentional mishap or misstep, you're going to be liable for that. And that's a departure of what we've always had in New Mexico over the many years I've been here. It's always, willful disobedience or defiance, not being willing to do what we're being asked, not an unintentional slip up. That put a lot of fear in people. And I think that maybe that was maybe not the way to go when people are already very, very worried, very nervous, trying to do the right thing. But we do appreciate the information we got from NMCA on how we could do a better job and what are some of the precautions we should take. I want you to know we followed those very carefully. But I think it is important that we work collaboratively, we work as a team, and that's always how we have done it. Surveillance testing, we started this morning. That's where I started my day. I won the lottery for being the first group in terms of surveillance testing. And so in order to make this meeting, I made sure I was the first one in line. So at 8 o'clock this morning, I was at Sandoval County and did the surveillance testing. There are another 139 of our staff members who went through that this morning. Our county did a really good job of getting everything set up and ready to go. But again, there are a lot of logistical issues, and we still have a lot of questions that are not answered. And I think one of the questions not answered is, what do we do with those who say no? And when you allow, if you allow that, then you invalidate the data that you're getting back. It's not truly surveillance because it has to be random, and you have to have, a process that's adhered to. I will tell you from personal experience this morning, not too terrible and very quick. But one of the questions, again, it's people are being pulled away from other things that they need to do. We're doing ours on Wednesday, and we are in an AB hybrid, so teachers are not working in person with children, but they're still working with children at home. And so the whole question of substitutes and how do we cover the learning when these 140 people are gone, especially if they're teachers. Not everyone were teachers this morning. The number 1 and 2, I was number 1, and a gentleman from our maintenance department was number 2. But that this whole idea of how we manage it and how we afford it, the cost of it, and when you're short of teachers and you have almost no subs, it does present a challenge. But I certainly understand what they're trying to accomplish with it. I just don't know if the logistics of it are really going to work out. But we did our first run this morning, and everybody did get through. And it was really about a half day that we had people at the county with the test. And then I won't repeat what's been said. Sometimes the last minute requirements, and we all know that those don't just change for us, that they've changed for people in the public ed department too, and they're getting it from other sources. We know this is all new, and we know that everyone is putting out a lot of effort. And I just want to say that, and we appreciate the help and support that we have had. It is, but I'm hoping we can get some sense of normalcy, because we, it just seems like we just keep throwing things at our staff, and they're doing their very best. I really think that if there are things that we can look at this year, simplifying. I did send some information. I'll be glad to share it with any of you that would like it as well on what assessment might look like for our district this year. And it's going to look a little different. And I won't go into any great detail on that right now, but there's all kinds of, again, logistical issues in terms of how you gather assessment data and make it reliable or valid. And we really need to rethink assessment, for example, this year, and just in terms of having gathered information that is useful or even valid. So, so many times we just keep thinking about, what's our 2-year plan, what's our 5-year plan, what's whatever. I guess the message I would like you to hear from me is that we're kind of in survival mode right now. And I'm sure many of you are very familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And a lot of the needs of our staff and our students are at that very first 2 levels. And so until we can satisfy that, really hard to be talking to people about new initiatives and new programs and new goals and new, we're kind of in a survival mode right now. We'll get out of that as the year goes on, and I think we establish the new normal, get more comfortable with the things we're doing, then that will get much better. But it's certainly, it's been a very interesting experience, school reentry, and I'm really hoping that we can see some flexibility. And those of you that have been very involved over the years in Baldrige, that whole term of agility, we're certainly asking people just to change constantly, and that's just hard. Thank you very much. And again, if there's any information you would like from our district or from us, please let me know. I would be very happy to send that to any of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Cleveland. And the next person on my list is Brenda Behill. She is the superintendent of the Tularosa Municipal Schools. Brenda, go ahead. Brenda.
My microphone won't unmute.
We can hear you now, Superintendent. Please go ahead.
Brenda, you are unmuted. Brenda, your sound is on. And
My sound is on. My microphone won't unmute.
No, you're fine. Go ahead. We can hear you.
Presentation because it's been covered. Madam Chair and members of the committee, it's a privilege to present before you today. My focus was more on how we developed our budget and what considerations we made. And this budget was based upon the 4% increase. But what I want to show you, for one thing, is the salary mandates that are put in place and how that impacts our district. Because you also have to consider health insurance cost and the dental. And I agree with previous presentations that by delaying the 8.7% increase this year, we're going to see a double-digit increase next year, and that is a great concern. We also saw no increase in the contribution, but the employee contribution rate is 10.7% and the employer contribution. This transferred to salary costs that you can see here for our level 1 teachers, but I'm going to go to the slide that gives you the overall. Oh wait, I skipped that. The total salary increases when it was the 4% was $345,134, and that included salary and benefits. Unlike the districts that presented previously, our reduction in funding is not in the millions. It's $476,789. What we did as a district was determine that we were not going to implement the 4% increase. So our board met and reduced it to a 1% increase as of July. And so none of our salary increases went into effect. We revised our salary schedules and we followed the direction of the legislative intent, with no district administrators, no district personnel receiving increases. I'm going to skip some of these but I do want to say that one of the really difficult things was implementing the new program codes. The majority of our district is low income. We have 50% of our students are in the SNAP program. 81.4% of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch. We have a population that is 27% Caucasian, 39% Hispanic, 30% American Indian, and 17% of our students are
they are students with disabilities. So all of our at-risk funding was mainly whole school. We used it for counselors at every school, programs at every school that were whole school programming because of our student population. I also provided you, well, I'm going to skip there, our cash balance trends. As you can see, our cash balance trends have gone, they were on a progressive up. We did have cash balance swept at one point, and then we are constantly decreasing in cash balance, with the 2020, I think, increasing as a result of the school being closed toward the end of the year. You can see where our operational budget is primarily spent. This will not change with the reduction in funding. Those areas will probably still remain about the same. And those are just our budgeted expenditures. The majority of our budget goes in salaries and benefits. We are, as well as other districts, concerned about the prior year funding for next year's budget. We would hope that we could have a hold harmless in that area or utilize the previous year budget for this year, because we are currently down 58 students. We had 881 students on the 40th day last year, and we currently have 823 just this morning. And I want to point out that it is not only districts bordering state lines that have students going out of state. I had a call from a parent this week that told me they went to out of state this weekend looking at schools. I have another parent who has transferred out of state to another school. And this morning I learned I have 2 more elementary students who are out of state. I'll skip all of these in the interest of time. I do want to, I'm going to go more to instructional materials. Our instructional materials, last year we spent, our final was $81,472 for our allocation. And we did spend all but $7,000 of that on instructional materials. I am concerned about the amount of money that we are spending, the funds that we're spending. I agree with the press presentations about the ever-changing requirements for opening. Currently, we are in remote only, and that is the board's decision. We are scheduled to meet next week to determine if on October the 19th, we will return in a hybrid model. And that is pending whether we have the filters. We, like other districts, bought masks and we bought masks that were disposable for our students and our staff, only to find out later that changed to needing cloth masks and cloth for students and staff. Our nurses have been great. They made every staff member a 2-ply cloth mask. The district bought 1 cloth mask for every staff member. We had many staff members who needed face shields. We purchased those only to find out face shields have to be also worn with a mask. So
the ever-changing environment that we're in has created a lot of stress with our staff, our students, our parents. I think right now, parents are anxious to get back to school, so I'm hopeful that we will make, the board will make that decision next week. And that too will be dependent upon us having everything we need to start. I know that we have the 8 filters in our systems right now. We have ordered 13s, and to be perfectly honest, when we ordered them, when that requirement came out, they were 6 to 8 weeks for delivery. So everything seems to push back what you need to do. Transportation, you know, we are okay with transportation because we are delivering meals, and our contractor has been willing to work with us, and so we're very fortunate there. And I just think that in these unknown times that we're in, things change, and I know they change for everybody, and it impacts everybody the same way. So I would hope that as you look at the future for schools and districts, and that you consider what is happening. As everyone has presented today, it has a great impact on our ability to provide an outstanding education for our students. So with that, I'll close, and I thank you for the opportunity to present today.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Behill. And our next presenter who is here is Cody Sumter from Tularosa Municipal Schools. Thank you, I'm sorry, I knew that. Cody Sumter from Des Moines Public Schools. Thank you, Superintendent, for being here.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you from the little bitty district of Des Moines in the northeastern corner of the state. It's a district that's very near and dear to my heart. I'm a product of the Des Moines Public Schools, and I'm very vested in the future of that school district. Quickly, I'll try to talk about some of the reentry experiences that might be different than the previous superintendents that spoke before me. Being a micro district, it's easier on a scale probably to re-enter because we have smaller class sizes. It's easier to get those materials out to students. We face the same challenges as the other districts on the ever-changing guidance. Heard the allusion about building a house on changing sand, and that's what it felt like. Every time we would have a plan and we'd roll it out to the community, it never failed that we would have guidance changes and have to roll that back, and a little bit of our credibility seemed to go away with each one of those changes. One of my greatest concerns in a small district is we have teachers that, for instance, I have one 7 through 12 math teacher, I have one 7 through 12 English teacher. Our elementary grades, some of them are doubled up. And so we have students that are in person and online, and only one teacher to handle both of those platforms. And that's created an additional burden on our teachers. I see often those school teachers' cars in the parking lot still at 6:30 in the evenings so that they're able to prepare for the next day of quality instruction for those kids. And I'm afraid that that's going to wear on them, and they're going to wear out at a rapid rate. When we get into the nuts and bolts and the program unit value changes, as they've spoke before, we've experienced nearly a 5% budget cut. In a small district like Des Moines, when the majority of our funding goes towards instructional staff, that ultimately means that we're going to have to cut staff. The floating unit value makes planning very difficult, and having to change those budgets during the school year is going to continue to create burdens. Again, in a small district, we have 1 or 2 people doing those jobs, the business manager and myself, and that creates an incredible burden on them. The oversight of the budget process, as Mr. Delgado talked about the changes to the new ed plan, again, you've got one or two people in a small district that is wearing many, many hats with those jobs. And I don't know if you understand that in a small district like mine, I am not only the superintendent, but the federal programs director, the special ed, the athletic director, help drive a bus. If, we've got a bus driver out, we carry in lots and lots of hats. And so when we add these additional reporting to us, then it's a burden. Our business manager, it is not uncommon for her to be at that school 7 days a week. And so those are cumbersome jobs. I spoke briefly about our instructional spending amounts. 84% goes to instructional spending in our district. Yes, my per pupil expenditures are going to be much greater than a more densely populated school district. However, I want to point out that 100% of our students graduate and nearly 100% of those pursue post-secondary education, and all of them are viable citizens when they walk out the doors of Des Moines School, and I don't know how you put a dollar value on that because, they are contributing citizens to the state of New Mexico. One more thing I want to talk about briefly on this, the pre-K spending. We were the first time ever we were able to have a pre-K at Des Moines last school year, and then again this year we were funded for it. Even with the pandemic, 100% of my students that are eligible to participate in that pre-K have taken a part of that. And there's no other childcare, no other pre-K programs in the area. And so I know that's an expense, that's added to a small number of students, but it's paying off. Even with the pandemic, we have those pre-Kers last year that are now kindergartners. I can guarantee you every single one of those kids is going to be reading by Christmas and therefore well on their way to a high quality education. The downside of that pre-K program is the paperwork is very cumbersome for a small district, but it is very much worth it. Our at-risk funding changes and varies, just because of our small numbers. Statistically, they're going to vary. We've jumped as high as 81% increase in at-risk funding and then fell again by 21%. That creates challenges for systemic planning. Our at-risk funding is, we're talking $30,000 for a year of at-risk funding in Des Moines. However, we try to do as much as we can with that small amount of money. One of the places that we've put that money is making certain that all of our kids have the employability skills class as seniors to make sure that they have those, the skill set needed to be successful in their future endeavors. We found that it's particularly helpful for our at-risk kids because we're helping them complete college applications, the FAFSA forms, some time management pieces so that they're successful in post-secondary education. Additional things that we were able to do was just adding additional time for math support in our 7 through 12 students and some after-school support with hands-on STEM for our elementary. Other thing I'd like to point out about at-risk, though, is in the pandemic that we're in, I think that you could agree with me that we're going to have a greater percentage of our students that are at risk. All of our kids are in need of additional socio-emotional supports. In a small district like Des Moines, one of the hats I didn't mention is I'm also the counselor. And so we don't have a counselor on staff. We have a nurse that's 1 day a week, and we have a social worker that's 1 day a week to service those students. We're seeing a greater increase in those needs, though. Participation in new programs. I know that the ELTP and the K5 Plus is very near and dear to your heart. You spend a lot of money on the research of those programs. You spend a lot of money invested into those programs, and you haven't had as many school districts take advantage of that as you would like. Unfortunately, my district is one of those that hasn't taken advantage of it. The last survey that I did, 63% of my families were against adding additional days and to meet the ELTP requirements. And several of the families even went as far to say that they would homeschool their kids if we added additional days. And when I have such a tight budget, losing 1 or 2 families can be losing one or, could mean losing 1 or 2 teachers. And so that's incredibly important. That being said, we try really hard to utilize the time that we do have to make certain that we're using our time wisely, and it's very effective, not just at giving them additional time in the seat. Currently, we're on a 167-day calendar. I am the only small school district that is 5 days a week, and we do value the time that we have those kids in those chairs. In the event that we were mandated to do ELTP Plus, we've done some preliminary planning as a region to see if we can utilize our resources and our funds to make that happen in northeastern New Mexico. And so, we aren't completely ruling that out. However, with the percentage of parents that are right now saying that they would participate, I don't feel like that fund will cash flow. In addition to the need, even though that the funding is built into that formula for the teachers' additional days, it isn't for the additional support staff that would be needed to make that program stay in the black. And so that's a difficult item when you are a school district on emergency supplemental funding, which I didn't mention earlier. We are one of the only school districts that are on emergency supplemental funding, and that additionally has been cut in addition to the 5% reduction to the SEG, which is about 10% for my district, which is quickly done on the backs of students. The only way to do that is with additional staff cuts, which means more combined classes. As a teacher myself, at least a quarter of my career has been in a multi-age classrooms, and I know full well what happens and the things that you have to give up when you have 2 or more grades in the same classroom. They do not get the same quality education as when you have 1 teacher per grade level. The instructional materials budget, we were very grateful for the additional appropriation in 27-109 last year, which helped close the gap for the math adoption as well as the science adoption, which are both our most costly instructional materials budgets. We participated in a program with Anthony Burns Bureau with the instructional materials with Columbia University to refine a process for adopting high quality instructional materials that better meet our students' needs as well as making us good stewards of our money. We happened to buy math program that had the math online component because of our experience in the spring. However, there are several districts that didn't do that and had that additional expense. For us, the biggest limitation I see with that is other years, just like Senator Roush, former Representative Roush spoke about, we can't stretch out that budget or those books because we too have history books that went 2 full cycles, and you can't do that when you have an online curriculum. You're forced to purchase it in cycle. The other piece that has helped us to stretch out our instructional materials is opting for some open sources, like Eureka. However, that does create some additional burden on teachers. In conclusion, I just want to make certain that you all hear that the schools and students in schools like Des Moines have the same, sorry, I lost that a second. They deserve the same quality of education as students from larger, more populated areas. And I very much worry that if we have those budget cuts, that quality of education is going to decrease as we have to let staff go. So I appreciate your time, and we will stand for questions.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It seems like you did it at warp speed.
Well,
thank you again. We have a list for questions, and the first person on my list is Senator Mimi Stewart, followed by Representative Joy Garrett, followed by Senator Linda Lopez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question, so first of all, thanks to everyone for presenting to us today. It's very interesting to hear the range of our schools and what's happening. My first question is to Mr. Delgado about his presentation. And my first question is on page 11. On that slide, you show an example of operational subfund by program code. Can you I think it's the PED's responsibility to do this, but can you tell me if this type of example, if it aligns to the funding that we allocate through the SCG? In other words, we always say in the budget, how to do things, and then the SCG is filled with issues like instructional material, et cetera. So how do you make sure that this sub-fund is aligned to the money allocated through the SCG? Can't hear you. Can't hear you, Mr. Delgado.
Sorry about that. So Senator, this is a needle worth threading. Right now, the current requirements around SCG still give a lot of deference to decision making at the local level. I think that the approach that we're taking is mainly to kind of shine a light and create some transparency around how funds are being budgeted. And through the educational plan process, there was, some very clear pressure put on the districts to consider targeting the amounts that were identified in the SCG breakdown that was provided to them when they started developing their educational plans. But in the end, the districts still have some latitude on how they spend SCG dollars without the dollars being categorical or given out through some other mechanism. There's still a lot of discretion at the local level to make decisions on how this money is being spent. The program codes are another effort to try and allow for clear reporting and transparency and how funds are being used. But it is still, in large part, if it's SCG money, the districts have lots of latitude on how they spend that money.
Yes, and Madam Chair, of course, I understand that, and we like that in New Mexico. We like this idea of local control.
Senator, if you speak slowly, maybe they can hear you much more clearly in the hinterlands. You're breaking up apparently.
So on that same chart, Mr. Delgado, there's 34% that has 4 zeros and the words "no program." What does that mean?
I'm sorry, Senator, I couldn't hear the question. The audio is still choppy coming out of the floor there.
Okay, page 11. The same sub-fund by program code. There is a significant portion of this, 34%, that has 4 zeros and no program. What does that mean? Where is this funding going?
Yeah, so that means that amount of funding is not associated with any of the program codes that are available. And it could be going to different things. It could just be going to purposes other than any of the program codes that are identified. One area that we found that a lot of funding is being included in that 0000 program code is benefits. So employee benefits, the history and tradition has been that those don't get budgeted directly to a program code, but fall into an uncategorized string. Now, there are other portions of the UCOA string that identify what that funding is being used for. These program codes are not intended to assure that every expenditure is classified by a program code. They are just intended to point out when those funds are specifically targeted to the programs identified by the program code. So it's not required that they find a category to put a program code category to put them in. There are still some expenses that don't fall into any of the program code categories.
So Madam Chair and Mr. Delgado, the salaries are included in regular education programs, 1010. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that is one of the program code categories.
All right, thank you very much. Sometimes we get so much information, we get confused by it. So Madam Chair, I want to make a few comments. You know, I think we're all struggling with what we're going through. I had a lot of concerns with what the PED was doing early on, but I believe they're working just as hard as everyone else. And I think one of the issues with the air filter is that the science took a while to catch up to what we were doing, and the current science really focuses on the virus hanging around in the air. So I think that's why the requirement for the air filters came late. I understand all the consternation. Perhaps it wasn't flexible enough, but those air filters are very important to in-school learning. So I'm hoping that we can get past that consternation. Having said that, I really appreciate and like what the superintendents are talking today. The suggestions they've had, I think, are good ones. I like the idea of us not counting this year as the membership, that we give some flexibility, that when we start next year, it could be a combination of, let's go back to 2020 membership, or unless 2021 is higher. I think that is a good move. I also like this idea of, let me get the exact words with it. Well, delaying some of these constitutional mandates that the schools have that we've put in place the last several years. It doesn't make any sense for the schools to have to write a plan about attendance and put that all in place when attendance is such a huge issue right now. So I agree with delaying some of those constitutional mandates. And I, for one, have thought for years that we were not putting enough funding into instructional materials. Those materials they get more expensive every year. It's like healthcare. Those industry just have us by the neck. So I believe that we should continue to put the funding in the SEG, but we should increase that base funding. So that's kind of my takeaways. I just appreciate everyone being so flexible and so focused on children, and then not forgetting the teachers, many of whom are at risk with what we're doing. So I think it will. I called this a gap year. People don't like that. I think it was Superintendent Trujillo who called it a red shirt year. I mean, we're all going to have to dealing with this effects of this year for several years. So let's give more flexibility. Let's not hamstring our district. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Stewart, and that is so true. Our next speaker is Representative Joy Garrett. Our next questioner.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. This question, I'm not sure, maybe it goes to Mr. Delgado, but maybe some of the superintendents would weigh on it. Several people have been contacting me from my district about what is the procurement process for PPE in school districts and charters. Is PED doing this for the state? Is the state doing it for everybody? What's the process? Because is it each entity for themselves, or is there something happening at a higher level?
If I may, Representative Garrett, Chairwoman, members of the committee, it's a combination of both. So we have had deliveries of PPE throughout the state. of masks, of gowns, of even face shields, gloves. So it's a combination of both. So there was a large purchase that was done at the state level that they have gone through round 1 and round 2 of delivering that PPE to districts. However, it's not, I mean, it has to be replaced. I mean, it's not enough. It's not something that it has an extended lifetime. So districts are also having to do those purchases themselves. The other piece with the PPE is the equipment or plastic barriers in front offices for teachers. All of those pieces we are purchasing ourselves, along with thermometers, temperature checks. So where we consider that PPE, it might be 2 different categories. So I would say the answer to that question would be a combination to both. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything.
Oh, Madam Chairwoman, does anybody else want to comment on that? Okay, is there anything from Madam Chairwoman and Mr. Delgado? Is there anything else you would want to add to that? How it's going? Does it need improvement? Is it a continued work in progress?
Representative, Madam Chair, the only addition I'd add, I think Superintendent Trujillo spoke well about this, but you know, I've done a few things to try and get ahead of procurement at the state level, and one of the problems is that the bulk of the funding that's available for this is CARES funding, and that's funding that is at the district level. So a lot of the procurement requirements are going to fall on the district. However, you know, we've been working hard to use some of the smaller pots of money that we have to procure things like PPE, and we're also working on an initiative right now to at least align the vendors that are available in the state for for student connectivity, so that the schools will have access to those vendors if they have students who are still having trouble connecting. But you know, the way that the market is right now, unless you have the money available and ready to spend, it's hard to organize a procurement effort. I've taken a couple runs at it, and it's difficult. The state is working on some state level procurement through the General Services Division. We've been in contact with them on some of the work that we're doing, and but through the Department of Homeland Security, we've received access to over 1 million masks, for example. And we've distributed some of them and are working on distributing more. So that should be a big assistance to the districts as far as masks. We're also in the middle of finalizing procurement on some close contact kits that we'll send out to districts with one of the smaller pots of money that we have available for that. So, I mean, I think like Superintendent Trujillo mentioned, I think everyone's, you know, taking ownership of this challenge and pushing through it to get the equipment and services that we need to support students during this time.
Thank you. That was very, very helpful. Madam Chairwoman and whoever feels they can answer this, do we need to revise the instructional materials, definitions, or language or statutes to, you know, embrace more of our electronic devices? I'm just not that familiar with the actual statute.
Thank you. Who can answer that?
Representative, Madam Chair, I mean, I think that our Instructional Materials Bureau has been considering some of these necessary changes, and you know, I'll make sure to take this feedback to them, that this was one of the pretty consistent messages we heard from the superintendents today. You know, the landscape for instructional materials has changed a great deal in a short amount of time, including, you know, one of the superintendents mentioning the use of public domain instructional materials, that has shifted the way that we use instructional materials. You know, it's not always, you know, the classic textbook that you're buying. It's you know, sometimes it's finding ways to print or distribute electronic materials, and or it's training people up on that public domain public domain instructional materials. So the landscape is changing for sure. And I mean, I think it probably is appropriate for them to be looking at potential changes to the statutes and regulations associated with instructional materials.
Madam Chair and Representative Garrett, let me also weigh in on that question. I think it's more of a question of sufficiency than it is definitions. The other danger is if you change the definition because of a crisis that's right in front of your face, when we get past that crisis, the definition may not suit the world that's going to be tomorrow or next year. So I don't know that it's a question of the definition as much as just the amount of money.
And Representative, will you hold on for just a moment? I have had a couple of representatives and senators that are online that are still having difficulty hearing, and we're going to try to fix this during the lunch hour. But in the meantime, they're really interested in this particular subject. So I'm hoping that they can contact you individually so that they can, and including you, Mr. Delgado, so they can ask you specific questions that they cannot ask or they cannot hear about today. Is that okay with you? Okay, thank you.
And Madam Chairwoman, I have one final question. And I just want to thank everybody for being here today and representing the diversity of our school districts. My last question is, how is it in staffing? What percentage of long-term subs do you need? Or is the fact that students aren't currently enrolled in your districts balancing out the need for long-term subs? And if you're using long-term subs, just very briefly, how are you bringing them up to speed on the kind of remote teaching skills that they may not have had since they weren't teaching during the end of the last school year?
If I may, Representative Garrett, Chairwoman, members of the committee, we're treating our long-term subs, and thankfully we're very close to being staffed up, just like a teacher. So they're going through all of the same Canvas training. We're requiring that they, you know, work on the curriculum. They have a partner teacher. They can go to the Canvas captains. Since we are all remote, that's the way that we are working with that. Unfortunately, we have many administrators that are serving as long-term substitutes and teaching classes at the middle school and high school level. That's common across the district on top of all of the work that they're already doing, because they know, you know, we know they're qualified, they know how to do it, and we're using that as a unsustainable solution to the problem.
Madam Chair, Representative Garrett, I'd simply say at APS, we run about a 1% vacancies right now. Some of that's obviously being eaten up by the reduction in our enrollment, but the same situation as the other districts. You have people covering from administrative. And as far as the long-term subs, what we've done just to try to catch them up is we've offered them the training on how to use the online platform that we've provided, so that if they step in, they can move into that platform. Some of the difficulties has been, especially in a district the size of APS, creating the access so that a sub can work with that teacher. It takes a few hours to get them into a teacher's rostering so they can work with those specific students. You can't open it up so the sub can have access to everybody's materials. So it's been more on the operational end of it, just trying to get them in and get them to be able to use the materials that exist online. That's been the most difficult situation.
Madam Chairwoman, thank you, and thank you, superintendents and Mr. Delgado, very much.
Thank you very much, Representative Garrett. The next person on my list is Senator Linda Lopez, followed by Representative Stapleton. I have two others. Senator Lopez, are you on? let me go to Representative Stapleton, and then we'll go back to the senator, followed by Representative Herrera, followed by Representative Ferrari. Representative Stapleton.
My name?
Do you have a... You have too many devices on. Try it again.
Cancel my.
Yikes. Still sounds bad. There's a very loud echo, Representative Stapleton.
Madam Chair. Answer my question.
We're struggling to hear you, Representative Stapleton, because there's a very loud echo. Okay, we're trying to listen here. I'm going to go ahead and go to the next person until we fix your sound. Representative Herrera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. I guess I would just like to echo many of my former colleagues' comments. I think we really need to do a COVID hold harmless bill that really kind of sweeps these mandates that were set aside before for good reason and recognize that we are just working in uncertain times. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think anything we can do, and I know I probably won't be the master drafter of that legislation, so I thank the staff, both at PED and the LESC, hopefully for taking the lead on that, and appreciate that completely. And it will always boil down to the details when that bill gets written, and then everybody will get down there and fight over it again and see. We'll do our best. I think that will be the prevailing will of this legislature, but I also need to remind everybody that it's not only difficult for education, it's difficult for the whole state. We're looking at a $1 billion shortfall, and there just simply won't be enough money to go around. But the first thing I think we need to do is protect our children. And you know, I always kind of have to laugh at, you know, people expecting education to work in these times. There's a reason teaching is a profession. You know, it's hard work. There's a skill set. There's an educational background. There's knowledge. There's knowledge. I mean, I have to laugh. I go to my grandparents, my kids' home, and it looks good. I mean, there's 2 little desks set up, and, you know, they have their college-educated parents, and they have, you know, their computers and their internet, and everything's, you know, looks good. But you forget the 3-year-old just comes in like a low-flying helicopter in this workspace, and you know, you can tell a 6-year-old to log on and pay attention, but some days it works and some days it doesn't. So I am just very sympathetic to all of the leadership in this state, and we're very grateful for all of you. I just want to emphasize that because I think we all will muddle through as best we can and try and serve as many kids as we can, and know that it won't be the best. I also, I guess, this is just a comment. I don't really have a question for everybody. You know, introducing a new accounting system at the same time you're going through COVID, probably wasn't the best time to vent, but I guess everybody has done that. I think we need to hold harmless clause. I think we need to hold that harmless too. I'm just going to say that. I also worry when you go, being a former CEO, when you go from one accounting system to the other, it always sounds good in theory, and you do it for certain reasons, and I'm sure there are good reasons. The problem is comparing old numbers with new numbers. That's really the problem with introducing new accounting systems, that you no longer have 10 years of data to compare. And in many instances, you start from the beginning. So I also worry about that. And so I would just like to recommend that when you're looking at these actual things that you talked about in the hold harmless, that you also look at the accounting standards that were recreated. And honestly look at that and tell us what you can and can't do during these times. Thank you, Madam Chair. It really wasn't a question, just a comment and echoing, I think, what my other colleagues were saying.
Thank you very much. The next person is Representative Ferrari, followed by Representative Stapleton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I ditto what has been said about our appreciation for the superintendents and the principals and everyone, the teachers, trying to help our students during this unpredictable time during the COVID and protecting everyone. For Superintendent Trujillo, I really appreciate you being here, and also for your great presentation of what's going on in our Las Cruces public schools. My question is about, you mentioned about the coaches, and I was wondering, are those coaches for the teachers, or are those coaches also included for our special education students who seem to have an extraordinary amount of difficulty during this time?
Representative Ferrari, yes, it's very nice to see you. We had to drive all this way, but that's okay to see each other, but it's very nice to see you. So, Madam Chair, members of the committee, that's a great question, and that's something that we as superintendents right now are grappling with. So when I was talking about our Canvas captains, those are our coaches for our teachers. So that particular group is, and they're also teachers. So they're educators that are really just kind of peer mentoring their colleagues to be proficient with the online environment. We are in the process right now of identifying our special education students that need more specific in-person support. So that's starting slowly over the next couple of weeks. We have been in a position to advocate for our most at-risk students that are not just special education, but really students that don't have that capacity with the computer. The family may or may not have that knowledge base of, okay, this is how you log on, this is how you turn in an assignment, this is what you're doing with these different pieces. So we have tutorials available in Spanish and English for our families, but we would really like to be able to serve in the 5-to-1 ratio, bringing those students in to also meet their needs. And at this point, that's allowed for pre-K to third grade, and then like high school athletes and certain students in organizations, but it is not necessarily allowed for our at-risk students. So we are advocating to be allowed to bring in the small groups of students to provide that extra level of support. So any support that this body could assist us with in that would be appreciated.
Thank you, and I appreciate your going through these extra and very targeted needs. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I have on my list 2 people that have had a problem logging on. Is it Senator Linda Lopez online? Senator Lopez? Representative Cheryl Williams Stapleton? It seems that they struggled to log on and we are having technical difficulties, but that is the end of my list. Are you on, Senator Lopez?
Madam Chair?
Oh, finally. Okay, go ahead.
Are you asking for me?
Yes.
Okay. I couldn't hear, sorry. Madam Chair, this may be just a question that can be answered, maybe through some emails, but I wanted to ask each of our presenters, specifically in light of our budget issues that we are having, as we all know, are looming above us for this coming session. What recommendations do you have for us, other than what I've kind of written some notes down? I know that we still need emergency supplemental funding. I know that there's some hold harmless issues, of course, that our schools are looking towards and trying to save the budget. But where else and what else can we do? In other words, give us some of your ideas as to what we can look to, maybe incorporate as we talk more about budget, as we look at this deficit that we do have. And Madam Chair, again, I know that it takes time, but if at least if those who are presenting could share something through email or such, and maybe send it to Rachel. I would like to see maybe some of your suggestions that could help guide us through this coming deficit time that we're looking at. That's all, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, and all of them are nodding their heads that they can provide something through email to Rachel. Based on that, we are now going to break for lunch. We'd like to thank the presenters very much. This was it was a struggle for outside folks to hear you, but you did a tremendous job and we learned a lot from you. So thank you for traveling from your outside world to work with us, and we thank you for your graciousness in working with our folks to email responses. You have a safe drive home. Thank you so much. And then for the rest of us, you have a 40-minute break for lunch. So those of you at home, you can also break for lunch, and we'll see you at 1 o'clock.